Hello and welcome to Six Pack. Today I'm gonna start a new series. What if Deku had a dormant, overpowered quirk? Part 1. If you enjoy this video, please give it a big thumbs up, and to watch more videos like this, subscribe to my channel and turn that bell notification on so you never miss an upload. Now wasting no more time, let's begin.
For Izuku, the remainder of the summer was uneventful. A rare escape from the chaos of his life in Japan, time spent with his father in America always felt pure. Life in America was good for Hisashi Midoriya. His art was thriving, and the atmosphere felt very different from the oppressive demands of his native country. One evening at dinner, the family talked about the prospect of permanently residing in the United States. Both Hisashi and Inko found the idea alluring. But the allure of Japan was nuanced for Izuku. With the highest rates of discrimination against both the quirkless and heteromorphs, Japan was a flawed country that stubbornly adhered to its traditions and prejudices. It was still home, though. Izuku had envisioned himself standing next to All Might as a hero there. In the furnace of disillusionment and treachery, that dream had now died. Logically, he had nothing left to bind him to Japan. The obvious choice should have been Hisashi's offer. Izuku, however, had good reasons to stay. Among them was his new course, forged from the ashes of his conviction and resentment. He had to stay at UA University to mold that path. The self-satisfaction of taking actions that had a significant negative impact was too valuable to be abandoned. A dark part of him wanted to see it all for himself, to see the institution that had let him down, now bucking under its reckoning. Izuku's punishment for the final exam disaster began when he returned to Musutafu. He was given a 3-week suspension and required to perform community service under the guidance of the hero fourth kind, among other things that would have otherwise infuriated him. However, he accepted everything and handled it with dignity. Izuku was immediately struck by how much Ua had changed after his return. The Institute's beloved, free style of teaching, and its once cherished autonomy had been taken away, allowing it to shape future heroes however it saw fit. In order to exert control over the university's operations, the Hero Public Safety Commission had stepped in. Ua was no longer able to function independently. The commission's action was warranted because the university's reputation as the epitome of hero education was now in ruins and its shortcomings had been made public. The final straw was Shota Aizawa's shame, but he wasn't the only issue. For the innumerable students it had let down, the entire university was held accountable. The systemic decay that had developed over the years could not be reversed by blaming a single man. Ua has adopted a standardized curriculum under the commission's supervision, putting it on par with Shiketsu University, its longtime rival. Shiketsu, which was already well known for its demanding and motivating programs, was now on track to completely outperform Ua because they had already mastered their curriculum, whereas Ua had to start from scratch. Ua would need to innovate, adjust, and start over in order to reclaim its position as the leading hero academy. In addition, there was the problem of numerous families continuing to sue the university for harm done to their children. To appease the irate mob, the commission had to step up and pay compensation out of their own pockets. This was difficult for the corrupt officials, but it was all worthwhile to finally put a yoke around Nezu's and his staff's necks because they are to blame for this mess. If they want to salvage anything, they must at least be willing to give up their freedom to restore UA's honor, if not as teachers then at least as heroes who care about the future of the young. Izuku's days went by quickly, settling into a routine that seemed almost normal. Without the hero trainee expectations, university life was surprisingly uninteresting. As expected, regular classes were boring, but they didn't have the weird undercurrent he had experienced in Class 1A. He had previously attributed the anomaly to his euphoria at being at UA and realizing a lifelong dream. However, the harsh reality of disappointment had gradually overshadowed that excitement. The teacher's conduct was the most noticeable shift. Izuku was struck by how normal they appeared. He didn't receive a single scowl of contempt or muttered word of censure. All the teachers were friendly, too friendly, almost like they were treading carefully. Izuku thought their strategy was dubious, but in the end, it wasn't worth his worry. However, Midnight and Present Mike were unable to fully conceal their guilt. Both had a close relationship with Aizawa, which was evident in their behavior. They wore heavy expressions, as though they were burdened by unspoken regret, each time they passed students from classes 2A or 3A. The older pupils didn't try to conceal their animosity. Their piercing gazes served as daggers directed at anyone associated with the disgraced educator. Regarding Aizawa, he had voluntarily resigned. Izuku believed that the decision was long overdue and ought to have been made much earlier. Finally, Aizawa admitted that his decision to become a teacher had been irrational in the first place. Although the affair was muted rather than joyous, many people quietly rejoiced over his resignation. Aizawa would remain a pro-hero even after being kicked out of UA. His abilities as an underground hero and the practicality of his quirk were deemed too valuable by the commission to be thrown away. But there were restrictions on his freedom, including ongoing monitoring to make sure he complied. Izuku had no problem with Aizawa keeping his hero license. He could concede, objectively, that Eraserhead was a capable hero. The true issues were his perspective and his incapacity to put reason ahead of emotion. However, Izuku was no longer worried about that. Nevertheless, Class 1A's new homeroom teacher was unexpected. Bubble Girl. Sir Night-Eye's sidekick. Izuku isn't interested enough to want answers, so it's unclear why the Foresight hero suggested her given that Mirio Tagata was the only student at UA with connections to Night-Eye. Standing shirtless in Might Tower's reinforced training chamber, Mirio's chest rose and fell in time with the heavy, worn-out breaths of a man pushing himself past the boundaries of the day before. Dust from his recent outburst of one for all mixed with sweat that trickled down his body. The air still crackled faintly with the hum of energy. Unlike any other gym in the nation, this one had been specially built by All Might himself, or more precisely, he had provided all of the funding for it. With reinforced carbon steel walls, kinetic shock absorption floors, multi-axis pressure regulators, and even a retractable roof in case he, or in this case, Mirio, needed vertical space to launch into the air. It was designed to withstand One for All's full destructive potential. Literally, All Might had not cut any corners in its creation. To make it happen, he had paid not one, not two, but 4 different types of fortune. As a joke, Sir Night-Eye once said, only All Might could spend enough money to bend economic laws and still have enough left to fund half of Tokyo's infrastructure. The number was so ridiculous. That was no exaggeration, of course. One of the richest men in the world was Toshinori Yagi, also known as the symbol of peace. International hero appearances, dozens of books, movie royalties, endorsement deals, and even his own hero-themed apparel and protein line, Might and Up, brought in money for him. It sold better in America than in Japan, for some reason. Everyone was aware of All Might's wealth, but for some reason, it had faded into the background. People appeared to forget, whether through selective memory, willful ignorance, or awe. Indeed, 10 years ago, a blurry picture of All Might wearing 2 different pairs of shoes with the caption, "Forgets he's rich. Still saves lives." When All Might unintentionally undertipped at restaurants or during lengthy strategy meetings, Night-Eye would still make fun of him for it because it was so well liked. From behind a tablet cluttered with data readouts, Sir Night-Eye stood across from the steaming training platform, keeping an eye on his protégé. From the timer counting down from the last training session to Mirio's vitals, his stern, exact gaze shifted. In the few months that Mirio had been using One for All, his growth had been steady, if not remarkable. He had only ever seriously hurt himself once, when he overloaded 40% of OFA without the right bracing, resulting in a minor rib fracture. Only for 10 minutes at a time had he been able to safely maintain 30% since then. Although that progress is admirable, it was. Mirai doesn't like how slow it is. Mirai had been completely rocked by their return from Island. The International Expo was attacked by the villain Wolfram, revealing flaws in protocol, security, and even Mirio. Mirio had fought valiantly. It was naivete, not failure. The magnitude of the threat made it clear that strength alone would not suffice for the next symbol of peace. He must be inherently powerful, an immovable force. They trained here for that reason. Just Mirio, Sir Night-Eye, and occasionally All Might, away from the crowds, the media, and the politics. Toshinori had turned into a proud father figure who was always happy when Mirio accomplished something new. And Mirai continued to have full faith in Mirio. It was he who had persuaded Toshinori to name him as his successor. He stood by that decision to this day. But he was not blinded by his faith. Mirio continued to smile too readily. Too many times, I apologized. When the power surged inside him, he still hesitated. He wasn't yet prepared. Mirai said, "You've done enough for today," in a calm but clipped voice. With his bright blonde hair stuck to his forehead from perspiration, Mirio fell back onto the bench. "Thanks, sir," he sighed, opening a huge water bottle and downing it like a deserted man. Then another. Then a third. You know, water intoxication is a thing. Too much, and your body starts shutting down due to electrolyte imbalance. Everything has a lethal dosage, even kindness, Mirio, said Mirai dryly, without even looking up from the tablet. With a feeble laugh, Mirio dropped the bottle in the middle of a gulp. Guess that's why I'm glad you're always keeping track, huh? A rare flash of tenderness flickered through Mirai's otherwise stoic features, but he remained silent. There was nothing awkward about their silence. It wasn't, however, there was a silent tension of expectation versus reality in the air. Not because Mirio was lazy, but because pushing too hard now could end badly. Today's session was cut short by 2 hours. Mirai had concurred as well. Mirio was still becoming irritated. That much was clear. His body shook under the weight of the legacy he now carried, not from fatigue. Although he never said it aloud. Mirai could tell by the way he clenched his jaw when the timer went off. Mirai thought for a moment about stopping Mirio as he opened his bento and started eating what must have been 3 full servings of food. However, everyone experiences days like this. He ignored it. "Remind me to have recovery girl check your sodium levels," he said. With his cheeks puffing like a chipmunk and his chopsticks still in his mouth, Mirio gave a thumbs up. "Wharf it," he muttered as he ate some rice. It took time to construct the symbol of peace, but he needed to be constructed quickly. Mirai Sasaki sensed that something was coming in the not-too-distant future. Something significant. Mirio is the one who raised the necessary topic, much to Mirai's silent satisfaction. "We need to talk about what happened on I Island." His voice is not as bright as it usually is. Here, Yue's golden boy, bright, beaming, and always hopeful, becomes dulled and worn down by time. Mirai gives him one nod, allowing him to talk freely. Mirio tells us, "I've been shocked a lot since coming to Ua," with a faint smile. "Seriously, it's like the universe has it out for me. Some thug during internships got me with a taser once, but even then, permeation didn't fail me. The electricity phased right through, couldn't touch me." His smile fades as he pauses. "But against Wolfram, I couldn't use it at all." He clenches his fists. "It was like, my body betrayed me. I wasn't intangible. I couldn't phase. Permeation just stopped, like it wasn't mine anymore." With her arms folded and her face unreadable, Mirai reclines. He's heard this before, right after the battle, but the memory has been sharpened by time. Though more introspective now, the trauma is still raw. Beneficial. "You felt violated," expresses Mirai, "and you were." Curious, Mirio's head lifts a little. Mirai goes on. "Electricity isn't like fire or water. It's not bound by form or direction unless it's forced. It's the wildest form of energy we know. Even Quirk users who control electricity don't truly command it. They only steer it, guide it." Mirio frowns and asks, "Then how did Wolfram do that to me? How did he lock my molecules down?" Mirai responded, "Because his quirk allows him to disrupt the nature of energy. That's what made him dangerous. He didn't just shoot lightning. He focused on it, weaponized it against your biology. He targeted your molecular structure, specifically the bonds that allow permeation to shift your body's state. He effectively forced those bonds to remain intact. He made your molecules refuse to let go." Mirio examines his hands. "He made me real." "Exactly," replies Mirai. "Against your will. That's more than a weakness. It's a flaw being exploited." Mirio takes a while to reply. He is more unnerved by the thought than he admits. The knowledge that his very atoms could be bound by the will of another is profound for someone who based his entire identity on untouchability. "But it doesn't mean you're useless." Shattering the silence, Mirai says. "You've already done what so many forget. Trained your body to fight with or without your quirk. You understand that being a hero isn't about being perfect, it's about being prepared, and prepared you are." A rare note of pride creeps into his voice. "This is why I chose you. You face weakness without denial." Mirio gives that a small smile. A tiny spark of pride flared up again. "But this does mean All for One is back," Mirai goes on to say. "And worse, he knows this about you now. Must have seen it firsthand. That's a problem." With firmness, Mirio responds, "But not one I'll let stop me, if there's a wall in front of me." "You break it," Mirai smirked as she concluded. They have a silent moment of comprehension, similar to when a master passes the burden of his knowledge to an apprentice, who effortlessly lifts it. However, the pain of failure still lingers beneath Mirio's fortitude. With his eyes downcast, he said, "I just wish it hadn't happened during that fight. That was supposed to be the moment. I was going to prove myself. To the world. To All Might. To you. But, I couldn't even get close." Mirai takes a while to reply. "All Might defeated Wolfram," Mirio added. "The public only knows that. No mention of the students who fought him first. No mention of the one who gave All Might the opening to win." Mirai's eyes are now more focused. Mirio had changed his voice. "At last, he's bringing him up. According to Mirio and Midoriya, he's complicated. I don't know if he's angry or just broken. Maybe both. But I know he didn't have to help rescue David's shield. He could have left him, but he didn't. Mirai's jaw clenches. That's proof enough that there's still a piece of him that remembers who he used to be. Maybe Dean Nezu's right. Maybe he can come back to the hero course. If that happens, Mirai replied sternly, then good for Ua. But I'll say this clearly, Mirio. Do not lower your guard around him. Ever. Mirai continues despite Mirio's slight flinch. He's already burned Ua once. You can argue it was justified, maybe it was. But that doesn't mean he won't do it again. It's in everyone's interest that we rebuild the university's honor, its future. If Izuku Midoriya stands in the way of that, he will have to be removed. Mirio stops talking because he can't argue. His mentor's words weigh heavily on him. However, he doesn't recoil from it this time. Izuku nearly completed his community service, but he believes UA will attempt to be more covert in how he administers his punishment going forward. Although those he rallied against Aizawa still speak to him, he doesn't care because it doesn't impact his non-existent social life and he is still viewed as a pariah in Ua due to his actions during the final exams. Izuku started to hear them on his way to his daily classes. Uncomfortable rumors started to spread across the campus. Izuku was immediately struck by the hushed, dreadful tone of the conversations. He started to piece together bits and pieces of the news as he listened. Musutafu was littered with dead animals, their heads gone. Alleyways and dumpsters painted with blood and bone fragments were among the gory details. Stray cats and cherished pets, including a famous dog whose disappearance had been reported only 2 days earlier, were among the victims. As Izuku looked over the most recent reports, his fingers grew tense around his phone. Although there had been instances of animal abuse before, the heinousness of these crimes had sparked indignation throughout the city. The public's reaction was immediate and intense. Pet owners locked their animals inside and called for prompt government action. The atmosphere was gloomy even among the students. Izuku heard Koji Koda's unmistakable sobs coming from another corridor. His old classmate was distraught because of his quirk, which had a strong connection to the animal kingdom. Momo and Ochako were at his sides, whispering comforting words that did little to stop the tears from streaming down his face. I think I'm going to throw up. What kind of sick fuck would do shit like this? I am not a cat or dog person, but this is fucked up on so many levels. My mom's quirk lets her talk to animals. What if she heard their screams and cries for help? Villains are getting more and more pathetic if they need to attack little critters just to feel special. Anger and disgust filled the campus. The violence disturbed even people who didn't like animals. It was savage to have one's head destroyed and one's body left in such a condition. Even though the news was disturbing, Izuku's mind shifted to another worry. Nezu, Dean. There had always been fascination and mystery surrounding the diminutive, extremely intelligent creature that oversaw Ua. After years of cruel experimentation, Nezu was saved by All Might, but he still bore the visible and invisible scars of his past. Most people thought the dead animals were just the victims of needless aggression. However, for those who had the foresight to probe further, the pattern pointed to something darker, experiments, perhaps involving the deceased's brains. It might very well hit a nerve in Nezu and cause old wounds to resurface if this were the case. Izuku shuddered, not out of fear but rather in anticipation of what might be revealed by such a reaction. With his colleagues at his sides, Toshinori stood in his deflated form outside the dean's office. The newest member of UA's teaching staff, Bubble Girl, Kaoruko Iwata, stood quietly next to him, her typically upbeat manner muted. For good reason, the atmosphere was tense. Over the past few weeks, Nezu had been under a great deal of stress due to the Commission's constant supervision. The joint training camp for classes 1A and 1B had gone off without a hitch, which was the only recent good news for Ua. The wild pussycats received praise after the students returned with noticeable improvements. However, that triumph did little to dispel the gloom that hung over Nezu. The most recent event, the graphic finding of disfigured animals all over the city, seemed to have pushed the chimera to the brink of his usual poise, which had been worn thin. Toshinori contemplated going into the office to lend a hand, but his hand lingered just outside the door. He paused, and a glance at the others revealed that they were all experiencing the same discomfort. If Nezu's notorious wrath came out, nobody wanted to be around. It was the side of Nezu that had earned him the unspoken reputation of a villain in disguise, and Toshinori had seen glimmers of it before. They had warned Kaoruko. The Commission may believe they had UA's dean under control, but they were playing a risky game. On her first day, her boss, Sir Night-Eye, had made it clear. Never get on Nezu's bad side. Even though Kaoruko had only recently arrived at Ua, She could already feel the tension there, like a fuse that was just waiting to be lit. The quiet was broken by Hizashi, who spoke in a quiet but worried tone. This has to be triggering Nezu's PTSD. With everything he's been through, seeing those poor animals, it's got to be rough for him. Sekijiro crossed his arms and nodded. This isn't the first time something like this has set him off. He needs time to cool down. We should pick up some of his workload for now, give him space. Nomori sighed and leaned against the wall. You're not wrong. With murmurs of support for their dean, the group dispersed after agreeing. Before Toshinori spoke, he and Kaoruko fell into silence as they walked side by side. He gave her an apologetic smile and said, I apologize if Ua was not the exciting new experience you were hoping for. Kaoruko laughed lightly and shook her head, dismissing his worry. Dealing with hero trainees is a breeze compared to investigative work with Sir Night-Eye and Centipeder. Still, this latest horror, it's hard not to let it get under your skin. Since Sir Night-Eye had a lot of faith in both of his sidekicks, though not enough to tell them about One for All, Bubble Girl is aware that Toshinori Yagi and All Might are the same. Toshinori understood her point and nodded. If the investigation requires outside expertise, my friend Naomasa will contact you. He's handling it. She said, that's good to know, but it sounded like she wouldn't wait to be asked if she thought there was a chance to look into the case further. Toshinori looked at her, his curiosity taking over. If you don't mind me asking, why the sudden career change? Going from a sidekick to a hero teacher isn't a typical move. Nezu approved, but the rest of us weren't given much of an explanation. After a brief pause, Kaoruko responded. The reason is twofold. First, the commission wanted to bring in staff they could influence more directly. Most of the current staff are loyal to Nezu, which doesn't exactly work in their favor. Toshinori scowled. What she said next shocked him even more than the idea of the commission infiltrating Ua with loyalists. Kaoruko went on, Sir Night-Eye recommended me. He doesn't like what Ua has become, but he also doesn't want to see it collapse entirely. I'm here as a sort of liaison. A middle ground between the commission and Nezu. Toshinori's brows went up. And they agreed to that? Night-Eye's always been unpredictable in their eyes. Kaoruko gave a small smile. He has his ways and managed to persuade them. The commission is content for now, but they've made it clear. If Ua stumbles again, there will be consequences. Toshinori let out a sigh as the realization weighed heavily on his shoulders. I appreciate Mirai's effort, but this isn't just about Ua, is it? After a moment of hesitation, Kaoruko turned away. No, it's not. She didn't elaborate, so Toshinori gently pressed. The second reason? She let out a slow exhale. The commission also tasked me with keeping an eye on Izuku Midoriya. Sir Night-Eye agreed, but only if I report to him first before passing anything along to them. Toshinori tensed up but remained silent. While the I-Island incident was officially credited to you and the Ua Big Three in stopping Wolfram, the commission knows that Midoriya was also involved, Kaoruko said with care. Then there's his quirk that continues to surprise. The ability to convert heat into electricity isn't something they can ignore. Torn between understanding and defensiveness, Toshinori clenched his fists. He shared Mirai's conviction that they must remain vigilant around Izuku, but he also wished to think that Izuku's actions on I-Island had been motivated by the last remnants of his heroic spirit. His desires are no longer understood by anyone. Slowly, Toshinori nodded. Yes, there's something different about young Midoriya. After that, they strolled in silence, both absorbed in their own thoughts. The momentum of the League of Villains was growing. Hero Society had been rocked by the tragedy in Hosu City, the Nomu rampage planned by Tamura Shigaraki and the hero killer's killing of Tenya Iida. Enraged by the chaos, the criminal underworld awoke with new vitality. Jiren, the broker employed by All for One, had taken advantage of this turmoil to bring in new members for the League. The new Vanguard Action Squad had quickly shown their value, despite Tamura's initial disinterest in the recruits. They had proven themselves in Cocoon City. Tamura's order was straightforward. Wreak havoc. In a well-planned rampage, the squad went above and beyond, leveling 4 hero agencies and killing 13 pro-heroes. The act appeared to be random, senseless violence at first glance. In actuality, though, it was a statement that the League of Villains was still a formidable opponent. But the daring assault had repercussions. The police force and pro-heroes reacted with relentless rage, tightening the noose around the League. Ever the strategist, All for One told Tamura to leave the anonymous bar in Camino Ward where they had been hiding. It was the end of their stay. The authorities were going to close in soon enough. For the time being, the League would relocate to Mino City and disappear. The departure preparations were finished, but Tamura stayed. The faint hum of the old TV was the only sound to break the silence between him and Kurogiri as they shared a final drink in the dimly lit bar. Before they departed, they intended to burn everything down, a scorched earth strategy to hide their footprints. Ever the vigilant caregiver, Kurogiri saw Tamura's discontent. It appeared that his ward's earlier bluster about the League's recent success had subsided. "You seem troubled, Tamura. What's on your mind?" Tamura leaned back and swirled his drink, his red eyes glimmering with annoyance. "The word, stain," he whispered. "That bastard still haunts me. Even now, my team only joined us because we lied to them, fed them that garbage about Stain being our ally. They're here for him, not me. They don't respect me as their leader." Kurogiri gave him a contemplative look. Stain's influence is indeed troubling. His ideals resonate with the underworld in a way that ours do not. As long as he remains active, he is a threat to both your authority and the League's unity. The cracks in Tamura's glass spread like spiderwebs as his grip tightened. "I want to kill him," he said, "but if I do, the underworld will turn on us. They worship him. He's got the highest hero kill count next to Master, as far as they know." Kurogiri gave a serious nod. "A schism is inevitable if Stain continues to cast his shadow over us. He must be removed." The old TV flickered to life as if on cue, and the room filled with static before All for One's distorted voice could be heard. He said, "I see you've been discussing the hero killer," in a cool, authoritative voice. "And you are correct, Stain is a problem. One that requires a delicate touch." Tamura sat up, focusing entirely on the display. "Do you have a plan, Master?" "Indeed," said All for One. "Stain's usefulness has run its course. He is far more valuable as a martyr than as a field agent. His death will serve our cause, but it must appear as though the heroes are responsible. Let the public's faith in them erode further." Beneath his hand-covered face, Tamura smiled a sick, twisted smile. "I would have preferred to kill him myself, but I can live with this." Kurogiri's head bowed. "A cunning plan, as always, Master. With Stain out of the picture, the new recruits will have no choice but to follow Tamura." "Precisely," said All for One, his voice growing gloomy. Class 1A had a difficult beginning to their time at UA University, but the Wild Pussycats summer camp had been a game-changer. They developed new skills, pushed their quirks to their limits, and strengthened both as a class and as individuals during the camp. Additionally, it was a much-needed breath of fresh air as it was their first chance to form a bond with their new homeroom teacher, Kaoruko Iwata, Bubble Girl. Although Shota Aizawa was occasionally a successful teacher, his harsh demeanor and detached teaching style frequently left his students dissatisfied. Other classes had viewed them as conceited because they had skipped orientation, and the stigma persisted. Many felt they were better than others, which stoked animosity and made Class 1A a laughing stock. Their reputation had also suffered because of Izuku's prior quirkless status, which gave the entire class a sense of weakness. However, since Bakugo and Aizawa were no longer involved, things had significantly improved. Minoru Mineta's return to the hero course was among the most unexpected events. Mineta, who had been reinstated in 1A, had returned to the class with a more acrid edge. He had a smug arrogance, driven by resentment that no one had seemed to remember him in his absence, and was no longer the blatantly perverted boy they remembered. Mineta's actions were annoying, but they were restrained by an uncommon loyalty. He had been among the numerous students who supported Izuku during his last stand against Aizawa. He now appeared intent on solidifying his position in the hero course and gaining his classmates' grudging acceptance. Hitoshi Shinso, who had long coveted a place in the hero course, was another addition to 1A. Both his loss to Izuku in the tournament's opening round and his challenge to Izuku prior to the sports festival were still vivid in the class's memory. Shinso finally got the chance to demonstrate his hero status, something he had long desired. Shinso accepted the hero course with humility, unlike Mineta. He was determined to take advantage of his chance, but he wasn't conceited or haughty. Izuku Midoriya's shadow hung over the class despite the advancements. Everyone was aware that the UA staff had set aside one of the final 3 spots in 1A for Izuku in the hopes that he would return at some point. Even as they made an effort to go on, the class felt the silent burden of his absence. Kaoruko Iwata, who had shown herself to be just what Class 1A needed, was at the heart of this change. She listened to her students' problems and provided workable solutions because she was focused, industrious, and truly interested in them. Her students respected her because of her warmth and approachability, which balanced her strictness. Her methods were shaped by her time spent working for Sir Nightai, whose exacting standards had equipped her to tackle almost any task. In sharp contrast to their early years under Aizawa, the students felt accomplished and confident every day after being guided by her. Class 1A felt like real heroes in training for the first time. The students withdrew to the dormitories after classes ended. Ochako Uraraka was sitting on the couch in the common area, eating crackers from her anti-nausea diet. The diet was suggested by Bubble Girl as a way to lessen her Quirk's weaknesses. Everything was designed to help her fight off nausea. Vitamin B6 and magnesium supplements, electrolyte-rich drinks like coconut water, bananas and crackers to stabilize blood sugar, ginger to lessen nausea, and peppermint to calm her stomach. She valued any improvement, even if it wasn't a miracle cure. Ochako's thoughts wandered as she munched on a cracker. She had noticed the familiarity of the new training routines ever since the training camp. She was reminded of the advice Izuku had once given her by the exercises, the strategies, and even the diet. Only she fully comprehended the depth of his notebooks, which were replete with painstaking analyses of strategies and quirks. She had brushed his recommendations aside as useless back then. She was now aware of her mistake. As Ochako viewed it with new eyes, he couldn't help but feel that their new training techniques were based on Izuku's notebooks. However, did the teachers take them without Izuku's consent, or had he voluntarily given them to them? She was uncomfortable in either case. Even though no one had given him the opportunity, Izuku had always made a sincere commitment to help his peers get better. When Ochako considered how frequently she had previously ignored him, she was unable to suppress her regrets. All she could think about now was whether there might have been a more secure method to activate Izuku's dormant quirk. A method that didn't cost him so much, of them losing him. She was still mentally referring to him as Deku, a habit she was unable to overcome despite her best efforts. Now it felt wrong, a nasty moniker that didn't fit the hero Izuku had dreamed of becoming or the person he had been. However, the name stuck because it seemed appropriate, like a central aspect of who he was that only she could see. However, she is no longer able to see that core. Ochako was deep in thought as she gazed out the window as the sun sank below the horizon, bathing the common area in warm light. Maybe it was time to start finding a way to put things right instead of looking back with regret. Since the summer ended, Mirio had been enjoying a comparatively uneventful few weeks. Now that classes at UA had started up again, he was readjusting to the routine of college life. His unwavering pursuit of mastery of One for All, the second quirk he inherited, was the only notable aspect of his life. Mirio was honored by Sir Night-Eye's insistence that he accept All Might's offer, but he was unable to overcome the tremendous pressure that came with having such a legendary power. It was both overwhelming and awe-inspiring to consider inheriting the very quirk that had made All Might the greatest hero in history. He felt unworthy in some way. Mirio had been made fun of for his awkward quirk control and ongoing hero struggles prior to meeting Night-Eye. He had personally witnessed the prejudice that accompanied being perceived as weak. His life had changed since he arrived at UA. Vlad King and the other instructors had been understanding and encouraging, letting him develop at his own rate. Mirio felt like a real underdog who could overcome the odds when Night-Eye took him under his wing and helped him realize Permeation's full potential. Nevertheless, Mirio is afraid to acknowledge certain drawbacks, especially to Night-Eye. Being given success on a silver platter, or stepping over the line, was how it felt to inherit One for All. He detested that sensation. Did he remain the same Mirio Tagata who had fought his way to the top? Fortunately, All Might had been much easier to confide in than Night-Eye and had been understanding of his doubts. All Might reminded him that his choices about how to use his power defined him, not the power itself. Despite this assurance, One for All had been extremely challenging to manage. Mirio has been using it cautiously ever since he only broke his body once. Mirio had finally regained enough control to use 30% of One for All's power safely after weeks of trial and error and more near breaks than he could count. He was sure he could keep pushing himself without getting in trouble with Recovery Girl thanks to the support equipment Melissa Shield had made for him. However, Mirio's life was not entirely going as planned. Growing uneasiness among third-year hero students, especially in Class 3A, was a persistent problem. Mirio had heard complaints and murmurs from Tamaki and Najire's classmates regarding their early UA experiences under Shoda Aizawa. Despite Aizawa's resignation, the hostility toward him persisted, and Mirio was distressed to see how severe the wounds were. In retrospect, Mirio came to the conclusion that Tamaki and Najire had never discussed their time in Class 1A. Tamaki and Najire would sidestep his inquiries about their own homeroom teacher whenever he boasted about Vlad King's encouragement. Now that Mirio had heard bits and pieces of their classmates' conversations, she was beginning to see why. The three of them were eating lunch together on the rooftop of the university, a peaceful haven from the busy campus. They usually invite other classmates to join them, but today only the big three were present. Najire had demanded some distance from everyone else, her customary joy subdued by annoyance. She pouted and prodded at her bento box, saying, "I just can't believe it, it's been 2 years, and some people still can't let it go. How much longer are they going to be bitter about Aizawa-sensei?" Across from her, Tamaki let out a deep sigh. It's not just bitterness, Hado. It's resentment. Aizawa-sensei's methods left a lot of people feeling helpless. And when you take away someone's sense of control, those feelings don't just disappear. Aware of the tension, Mirio made an effort to keep the conversation light. "I guess I never realized how serious this whole secondary career path thing was for everyone in classes. I mean, isn't that just an optional fallback plan?" Tamaki gave a headshake. "Not for us. Aizawa-sensei made it clear that if you weren't cut out to be a hero, there was no point in keeping you around. Most of the A section took the secondary career path seriously because it was their safety net. If being a hero didn't work out, whether because of injuries, personal reasons, or anything else, they'd have something to fall back on. Aizawa stripped that option away, so it was do or die for those who failed to meet his standards." Mirio scowled. "I knew he was strict, but I didn't realize he was that harsh. How many people did he expel from your class?" Tamaki paused. 2 were expelled on the first day but re-enrolled later. 9 more were kicked out before the midterms. 3 never came back to UA at all. His voice was heavy. "Even those of us who stayed, it wasn't easy. Aizawa-sensei didn't have a problem with me or Hado because we were getting good grades and using our quirks effectively. But in hindsight, that just made it easier to ignore what was happening to everyone else." With guilt clouding her normally bright eyes, Najire nodded slowly. "It's like we were complicit. We didn't speak up, didn't try to help. I guess, we just didn't want to make things harder for ourselves. Looking back, it feels like we were villains for staying silent." Tamaki looked at her comfortingly, but his own guilt was the same as hers. "We were rookies. It's hard to stand up to authority when you don't think you have any power." Mirio listened silently, the weight of their words stifling his usual optimism. It never occurred to him that his friends had suffered so much under their former instructor. Aizawa's tactics sounded more like a gauntlet of despair, but Vlad King had been a ray of hope. Mirio whispered, "You're not villains," before continuing. "But I get why you feel that way. You two always look out for everyone now. Maybe it's because of what happened back then." Najire smiled at him, a little, dejectedly. "Maybe. Or maybe we just don't want to make the same mistake twice." The wind blew across the rooftop as the 3 of them sat in silence, bringing with it a feeling of introspection. Although the wounds from the past were severe, they also influenced who they were now. Mirio was determined to keep his friends from drowning in their own misery. He began planning spontaneous get-togethers and brief campus excursions after classes in an effort to uplift the spirits of Najire and Tamaki as well as anyone else who was still burdened by unresolved grievances. Even though his efforts were not always successful, his unwavering optimism was contagious. Gradually, his positive resolve started to pierce the gloom that had descended during the 3rd year. Mirio tried to talk to Najire, but she remained quieter than normal. She abruptly sat up with new resolve one afternoon while they were relaxing on a bench close to the campus gardens. After saying, "I think I'll go talk to Midoriya again," she declared. Mirio and Tamaki looked at each other in surprise. It had come as a surprise when they first met Izuku Midoriya on Island. His cold and aloof demeanor didn't really surprise them, but that didn't change the fact that he was a good young man to have around and that he didn't back down from a risky situation like the one Wolfram created, which allowed them to save many lives. Najire had seen a glimpse of someone who was in great pain but cared more than he showed that day. Mirio was cautious when he asked, "You sure about that?" Najire gave a nod. "I could tell he was in a lot of pain, but he still helped us. He's not as far gone as he wants people to think. Maybe I can cheer him up. Or at least get him to talk." Mirio promptly consented to accompany Tamaki, who sighed without protest. Finding Izuku didn't take long. He was on his way to the main building, having just left the Heights Alliance dorms for Class 1E. But there was obviously a problem. Izuku moved slowly, as though each step required effort. He had a pale, sweat-stained face and the expression of someone about to pass out. It was the perspiration that really worried them. They were aware that Izuku could control his body temperature thanks to his quirk. He shouldn't have been sweating so much or overheating. "He looks sick," Najire said in a worried whisper. Mirio said, "Maybe he's going to see Recovery Girl," but he didn't seem to be persuaded. Izuku was greeted by Power Loader before they could call out to him. To the surprise of the 3, the instructor guided him to the campus generator facility rather than the infirmary. With trepidation, Tamaki muttered, "We shouldn't follow them." Mirio said, "Yeah, probably not," Najire said, "We're following them," and they were already moving. The three of them entered the subterranean facility that housed the central generator while skulking after Izuku and Power Loader. A huge machine that hummed with dormant energy dominated the vast room. It was accompanied by a smaller apparatus that people could stand on and that was wired to the main generator. The three realized it was a contingency plan that could use electric-type quirks to generate power in an emergency. Izuku stepped onto the machine, shocking them. Power Loader nodded to Izuku after adjusting controls behind a reinforced glass window. Izuku inhaled deeply before it occurred. His body emitted a tremendous surge of heat, which was soon transformed into blue electricity that crackled like a living storm all around him. The machine sucked energy from his body and roared to life. The big three could sense the intensity of the process even from where they were hiding. The air became heavy with static and charge. Izuku's face contorted with effort, but he remained concentrated, carefully regulating the energy flow as directed. Izuku stood pouring voltage into the generator for almost 10 minutes. By the end, his breathing was labored but noticeably steadier, and his posture relaxed. His expression relaxed as the procedure appeared to ease some of his earlier uneasiness. Power Loader said, "Good work, Midoriya," in a crackly voice over the intercom. "That's enough. Shut it down." Izuku fell to his knees and turned off his thermoelectricity. He appeared completely exhausted but also relieved. His question was, "How much did I output this time?" in between breaths. Power Loader's expression was tinged with awe as he looked at a monitor. "You hit a sustained output of 3 gigajoules per second. The generator's fully charged. UA has enough power to last at least 2 years now. But," he continued with a sigh, "if we keep doing this, you'll overload the system. I'll contact some people and see if we can find a more viable solution. For now, take it easy and get some rest." "Okay. You've earned it." Izuku struggled to stand up and gave a feeble nod. He walked slowly but with much less strain than before, stumbling toward the exit. He froze as he emerged from the generator room. Mirio, Najire, and Tamaki stood in his way, their faces a mix of bewilderment, worry, and incredulity. Mirio said warily, "Midoriya, what did we just see?" Izuku was obviously taken by surprise as his eyes darted between them. His shoulders slumped as he sighed. "It's a long story." "Well," Najire said softly as he moved forward, "we have time. And we won't leave until you tell us what's happening." Izuku paused, a brief lapse in his normally reserved manner. He saw their sincere concern and knew that this conversation could not be avoided. Izuku was surprised to see the big three, much less find out that they had overheard him discussing his predicament with UA's generator. Normally, he would have been irritated or frustrated, but he was too refreshed to give a damn at that moment. The four of them were now out of sight on the main building's rooftop. Izuku explained while leaning against the railing, his eyes far away but his voice steady. "It started right after I left Island to be with my parents in America," he said. "I'd wake up randomly in the middle of the night with my quirk activating on its own. My body would start releasing heat, uncomfortable levels of it. At first, it wasn't a big deal. Turning it off was simple, and I shrugged it off as not having mastered the quirk yet. But by the third time, I knew something was wrong." With wide, worried blue eyes, Najire cocked her head. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" Izuku acknowledged, "I didn't think it was serious," with a slight shrug. "But then, after my mom and I returned to Japan, things got worse. My body started releasing heat at large outputs without me doing anything, getting harder and harder to contain." His tone darkened as he paused. "The heat resistance I built up? My regeneration? It all stopped working in those moments. If I didn't find a way to vent it, it was going to kill me." Tamaki's face became tense. "You could have died?" Izuku gave a somber nod. "According to Recovery Girl, my quirk is constantly generating thermal and kinetic energy. It seems like it's capped at 10,000 Kelvin, but it's trying to push beyond that. If I try to hold it in for more than 96 hours, my body will melt away, and all that energy will release at once. And the resulting explosion, as Dean Nezu calculated, will make the atomic bomb that struck Japan centuries ago feel like an afterthought." The weight of the revelation was evident in the big three's horrified expressions. Tamaki looked away uneasily, Najire put a hand to her mouth, and even Mirio, who is typically the epitome of optimism, seemed shaken. Najire's voice was shaking as she whispered, "You've been dealing with this, every 4 days?" Izuku nodded once more and then said, "It's not as bad as it sounds. Usually, I can keep it in check by firing off a few blasts of highly compressed heat into the sky. It's enough to appease my quirk for a while. But recently, I've been more focused on my studies and a new life goal, so I've had less time to manage it. He smiled a little. Fortunately, teaching myself how to convert heat into electricity has been a game changer. It's a much better way to release the energy without backlash. Mirio scowled. Being a living battery doesn't sound like a better option. Izuku gave a small laugh. I don't mind it. If anything, I could make a fortune. Cities could pay me to power them occasionally. I could even give NASA enough energy to push the boundaries of space travel and build real starships. Najire's mood instantly brightened at the mention of starships. She clasped her hands together, her eyes glimmering with anticipation. Real starships? Like in sci-fi movies? That would be amazing. Imagine getting to see the stars up close. Izuku smiled at her eagerness. See? It's not all bad. Plus, being a living charger is part of my ongoing punishment from the staff for my tussle with Monoma. But as he went on, his face became more grave. Still, I always knew my quirk would cause problems eventually. Every powerful quirk has drawbacks, and mine is no different. Aside from the meltdown risk, when I fully empty my capacitor, my quirk becomes unusable for about 12 hours. It's a nice break for my eyes, honestly. Your eyes, Tamaki said again, at last raising her voice. What do you mean? Izuku paused, then clarified. When heat Esper activated, I gained what's basically a sixth sense for detecting infrared and seeing the world through heat signatures. The first thing I see when I look at someone is their body heat and their quirk. Wait, Najire leaned forward to interrupt. You can see our quirks? Izuku gave a nod. Yeah. They look like stars, up close. I can also tell how powerful they are. When I look at people like All Might or Mirio, it's like staring at the sun. It physically hurts my eyes. Mirio's mouth drooped a little before he started laughing, relieved laughter. So that's why you wouldn't look me in the eye. I thought you just didn't like my face. Izuku gave a sheepish smile. No, you're a very handsome man, but your quirk, I could go blind if I look at it for too long. As a more somber thought occurred to Mirio, his laughter subsided. Izuku might have suspicions about his other quirk. About One for All, if he could see quirks and their power levels. Even worse was the possibility that he might discover that All Might was only a smoldering ember. Mirio mentally noted that this needed to be communicated to Sir Night-Eye and All Might as soon as possible. However, the Big Three reassured Izuku that this was just another obstacle to overcome, so for the time being, the atmosphere lightened. Izuku truly valued their support, and they pledged to assist him if things ever got out of control. But they were all unaware that an invisible girl had been listening in on their entire conversation. Izuku had only missed her because his quirk was depowered at the moment. It started out as whispers. First, among general, business, and support students who were not enrolled in the hero course and had not witnessed the match in person but had heard the rumors afterwards, in the UA hallways. Then, frame by frame, the shaky footage was slowed down through the online feeds. There was disagreement among commenters. Was it a quirk? A change? Is it a trick of the light? They had witnessed the way Midoriya returned and how Katsuki Bakugo's last explosion transformed her torso into a smoking crater. Not limping, not crawling. Power exploding. A single blow that combined force and fire altered the tournament's entire meaning. The name, Heat Esper, quickly became popular on hero forums, trending with hashtags like hashtag Devolved Salvation Confirmed, hashtag Sleeper Awakened, and hashtag Phoenix Boy. People uncovered decades-old scholarly works by Dr. Fujita Enma, a little-known quirk theorist who has long been mocked and deceased, on social media. The idea that everyone, even those who are thought to be quirkless, actually does have quirks is what she dubbed the devolved salvation of humanity. Some simply weren't big enough to bloom. Too crazy. Too destructive to oneself. Too constrained by unidentified triggers. They forgot the thesis. Dismissed. So far. Two construction workers quarreled over their bentos at a Tokyo train station. I haven't spoken to my cousin and his quirkless daughter since they moved to the UK. My brother and the rest of the family had the nerve to consider celebrating never having the poor girl around. Last time I heard, she joined the Royal Marines and is a color sergeant. Not bad for a kid who can't shoot lightning from her eyes. Good for her. My youngest nephew has an awesome earth quirk and got expelled after only a week in Shiketsu for being an arrogant little shit. A pro-hero's hero agency, where he invited his friends to lunch. You saw the midterm recordings in UA, right? They used that kid as a mock villain against both classes. That's not normal. Only 6 passed. Only because one of them copied his quirk. What does that tell you? Tells me we were wrong. All of us. About the quirkless. Now a new word was circulating. Not anymore, quirkless, people who sleep. In locker rooms, students whispered about it. In staff meetings, teachers avoided it at all costs. If Midoriya had a quirk all along, if it was just sleeping, how many others were like him? There was simmering anxiety. The more sinister questions began to appear in forums and comment sections. So wait, does that mean my brother could still awaken something? I treated my sister like garbage growing up 'cause she had no quirk. She ran away. God, what if she had one this whole time and just never showed it? The resurrection is even more disturbing. He passed away. Midoriya Izuku passed away. His body had been destroyed. Nevertheless, he returned, completely regenerated, his quirk awakening just before death. People conjectured. What if that's the key? What if quirkless people just have to die and come back? Are we supposed to start pushing kids off cliffs now, like some kind of ritual? Cold statistics quickly tore that notion apart. 800,000 suicides occur worldwide each year. The quirkless made up the vast majority of those people. None returned. The exception, not the rule, was Midoriya. But people were always moved by fear, not by reason. Families remembered the outcasts for the first time in decades. In an attempt to re-establish contact and find out if they had changed, aunts and uncles were phoning nephews and nieces they hadn't spoken to in years. In some quarters of society, a more profound fear began to grow. What if some people did awaken? Could it be that they were hiding? What if they had complete recollection? Quirk supremacists went into a panic. If anyone could have anything inside of them, even the quirkless, then their position at the top was no longer safe. Everything they had constructed was vulnerable to failure. The singularity doomsday, the ancient prophecy of the darker side of quirk research, loomed over it all, lurching and looming. Quirks would become unstable at that point. When they are not contained by human bodies. When either too much power or none at all would be innate in everyone. That doom was not denied by the devolved salvation, it proved it. To put it another way, either humanity completely ignored quirks or they killed them. That is what Izuku Midoriya really stands for, the impending darkness that the League of Villains and Meta Liberation Army fear will materialize. This is it, some grimly posted. We're heading back to zero. And this time, we're going to burn before we even get there. At UA University, time passed, and with it came the annual Provisional Hero License exam preparation. But things were different this year. First-year students were permitted to participate for the first time in history, a significant policy change that left many educators and students perplexed. After all, upperclassmen with greater industry experience had always been granted provisional licenses. The Hero Public Safety Commission issued the directive directly. There was no formal explanation provided, but speculation and rumors were common. All Might, who had been appearing in public less frequently as the weeks passed, was the subject of the most widely accepted theory. The public was becoming uneasy, crime rates had subtly increased by 2%, and villains had begun to pay attention. Although heroes like Endeavor were putting in extra effort to maintain order, the sense of security in society was starting to erode. Many saw the Commission's decision to force first-year students to take the test as a last-ditch effort to increase the number of hero workers. Izuku became increasingly irritated as the concerns increased. Those who favored All Might's return to the hero course were further bolstered by the rumors surrounding his absence. Now that they were aware of his potent quirk, the neighbors who had previously despised him and practically wished him harm sang his praises during his final visit home. With hollow words, they fueled his ego in an attempt to nudge him back toward his destiny. Hypocrites. Izuku was furious at the mere thought. He felt ashamed that he had once thought such people were worthy of being protected, worthy of being a hero for. He thought he might strangle his idealistic, gullible younger self for being so blind if he could go back in time. But that was no time to think about that. An unexpected announcement sounded over the school's public address system as Class 1E got ready to conclude their last lesson of the day. A calm but firm voice called out, "Izuku Midoriya, please report to the infirmary immediately," from Dean Nezu. Izuku blinked, perplexed. This kind of summons would normally require going to the dean's office rather than the infirmary. He silently collected his belongings, ignoring the curious looks he received from his classmates. His uneasiness transformed into outright fear as he stepped into the infirmary. 2 students were lying on the hospital beds, their bodies soiled with sharp rocky protuberances in their limbs and nasty wounds. Dean Nezu stood by her side, always composed but with a seriousness that seldom showed, while Recovery Girl hovered close by, her face set in a mixture of worry and frustration. Nezu said, Thank you for coming on such short notice, Mr. Midoriya, as he kept a close eye on the boy. As he moved deeper into the room, Izuku made an effort to ignore the hurt pupils. Dean Nezu, what's going on? The injured students were indicated by the dean. There was an incident during Class 2B's training in Ground Omega. One of their students, Demoda Kuma, possesses a geokinetic quirk. He was sparring with a rival and accidentally went overboard, firing his rock bomb super move. The attack released rocky projectiles in all directions, injuring two of his classmates who were thought to be at a safe distance. Izuku scowled. That's disturbing. Fortunately, Recovery Girl managed to keep them stable, Nezu said, gesturing to the school nurse. But they'll be bedridden for at least a week, and the provisional hero license exam is in 3 days. It would be a shame for Class 2B to be 2 students short for such an important event. When Izuku understood why he had been called, he cocked his head, and you want me to help with their speedy recovery. Being a living generator is far too inhumane for someone who's just a student, Recovery Girl said arrogantly, concealing an inner triumphant smugness that Izuku can sense no matter what. Consider it as part of the community service you still need to fulfill, Sonny. Izuku obstinately and spitefully refused to practice using his Heat Esper's ability for cell activation and high-speed regeneration through kinetic energy transfer. When he swore off heroics, he wasn't just talking about the one with the costumes and the license to use the quirk in public. He was also referring to all forms of media and professions that are seen as heroic, like becoming a doctor. He was particularly vindictive when he once said, "Just because my quirk can heal, that doesn't mean that I am obligated to follow the Hippocratic Oath." After all, Recovery Girl's refusal to heal people who get injured more than usual in the hero course is known to the public, so if she can refuse to heal people with her quirk, then so can I. The elderly heroine obviously wasn't going to tolerate that remark and has been patiently awaiting Midoriya's return. Izuku also has the benefit of hindsight, knowing that he would look very bad if he turned down 2 students who had serious injuries like these. Nezu pondered as he took out his phone, and despite what you said months ago, you most certainly never stopped using this burning heel of yours. After tapping the screen several times, he held it up to play a video for Izuku. Izuku was seen in the video crouching by the side of the road and caring for a mangled dog. The animal's body was limp and its breathing was shallow, indicating that it had been hit by a car. Izuku recognized the scene, and his eyes grew wide. Izuku put a gentle hand on the dog's side in the video. His palm glowed red, and the dog's wounds disappeared in a matter of seconds. The once limp creature barked joyfully and waved its tail as if nothing had happened. Izuku let out a defeated sigh and then confessed, "It's not an ability that should be allowed to rust." Nezu smiled triumphantly. "No, it most certainly shouldn't," she said. "You know it's immoral to use living students as test subjects? I have a few ideas on how you can treat them without backlash." The commotion that ensued after it was revealed that Izuku began healing stray dogs and hero students was far worse than any of the rumors that had previously plagued him. This power was only used when Heat Esper first awoke during the sports festival, and it hasn't been used since. That changed when Nishimoto Sei and Nishika Chojiro, 2 infamous chatterboxes from Class 2B who had previously sustained injuries, spread the word about the miraculous abilities repurposing like wildfire. Within hours, there was a lot of excitement in the UA hallways about how Izuku's healing was superior to Recovery Girl's well-known quirk. All Might comparisons became increasingly common. Individuals had already compared Izuku's Heat Esper to a fiery manifestation of the symbol of Peace's power, agility, and fortitude, but his recently discovered capacity to heal solidified their conviction that Izuku was destined to become a premier pro-hero. It felt oppressive to be the focus all the time. People were complimenting him or hinting that it wasn't too late for him to go back to the hero course wherever he went. He encounters a very annoying, unoriginal mantra everywhere he goes. Izuku doesn't listen, but he is too preoccupied with his current goals to let the useless opinions of others drag him down. In any case, Izuku was aware that people would eventually become more assertive in their demands. In addition, Izuku has begun to hear others discussing it. Humanity's devolved salvation. He remembers reading that theory a long time ago, but he didn't even believe it because there wasn't enough evidence. However, it is debatable that, after 2 centuries, humanity hasn't fully embraced quirks, once you look at the results. In any case, it didn't give Izuku hope when he was still praying for a quirk, something he eventually conquered to show he didn't need it, until fate rejected him. Izuku heard all of the rumors and how terrified people are, whether they are beginning to think that the Singularity Doomsday is real or that there will be no more quirks in the future. In either case, humanity loses something valuable, and fundamentally, people will lament the primary source of their livelihood more than their lives, which only serves to increase his anger. It took Izuku 2 days before he was called back to the dean's office. He was hardly excited by the idea, but he obeyed without protest, moving through the hallways. His phone buzzed on the way, and when he looked at the screen, he saw that Daichi Noguchi, one of his Aizawa scandal co-conspirators, had called. Izuku replied, Noguchi, speaking quietly as he moved. With a voice full of relief, Daichi said, Hey, Midoriya. Just wanted to give you the good news. The commission pulled through. All those black marks Aizawa gave us. Gone. She said. I can finally apply to a decent college without worrying about that hanging over me. Izuku gave himself permission to smile a little. That's good to hear. I told you we'd fix this mess. Yeah, you did. Still no word from my parents, though, but honestly, screw 'em. They were too quick to cut ties when things went south, so I'm better off without them. Izuku gave himself a nod, but the familiar bitterness in Daichi's voice made his heart ache a little. Focus on your future, Noguchi. You've got a clean slate now, don't waste it. Yeah, I hear ya. Thanks again, Midoriya. Just as he arrived at the dean's office, the call ended, and Izuku put his phone back in his pocket. He braced himself, rapped on the door, and entered. Dean Nezu was waiting behind his desk inside, his face unreadable. The always upbeat third-year Mirio and Bubble Girl were standing next to him. Izuku became tense at the sight of the three of them together. Izuku looked at the others and said, Dean, in a neutral greeting, what is it this time? Nezu quickly got to the point after noticing his suspicion. Nezu began in an unusually solemn tone, Midoriya, as you're probably aware, the rumors about All Might's declining appearances have stirred unease among the public. And we both know that you are among the very few people who know why that is. In fact, I'd say you are among the 9 people in Japan who know of All Might's darkest secrets and won't spill the beans on the matter. Izuku sadly remarked, so he told you about me, but mostly about having to recall one of the most depressing days of his life. The day he met his idol and realized the adage, never meet your heroes. Yes, and at a very poor timing, I might add, otherwise, our first meeting might have been very different, and much more hopeful given what I previously knew about you, Nezu responded. The Chimera hero rarely loses his cool or even displays moments of annoyance or anger. But when Toshinori told him that he and Midoriya had met 10 months before classes started this year and that a more timid but still hero-worshipping Izuku Midoriya had seen the symbol of peace in his emaciated form, and that Toshinori had decided not to tell his circle of trust until Heat Esper appeared, Nezu was very much tempted to wrap All Might in a gift basket and send the soon-to-be retired hero to the underworld so that All for One could find and torture him for free. If Toshinori had the foresight to inform Nezu that Midoriya knew ahead of time one of the greatest secrets in the world, that the #1 hero in not only Japan but the entire world needed to retire very soon, a lot of what transpired when Midoriya and Bakugo first arrived in Ua could have been prevented. Nezu realizes that Yagi didn't want to make the young man's life any more difficult after flatly dismissing his aspirations for valor by letting authorities keep an eye on him all the time. It was still a big risk, and they were fortunate that Izuku was a good boy who understood the repercussions of the world discovering that All Might had a time limit on his abilities. Yagi already felt bad enough and didn't want to hurt anyone more. Toshinori would have forced Izuku to sign an NDA, perhaps offering him free admission to UA's general course, persuaded him against becoming a hero, and used his skills for quirk analysis if he had simply let Nezu handle everything. Before Heat Esper, all Izuku needed was a genuine support system that accepted and acknowledged his strengths. Nezu would have considered Izuku his own student, so even though Heat Esper might have remained dormant indefinitely, at least Izuku's intelligence would not have been wasted. What's done, however, is done. Nezu retorted dismissively, yes, but that is a matter best discussed between the two of you, and instead chose to concentrate on the true reason Izuku was brought here. The Commission, in their infinite wisdom, has decided that allowing first-year Hero Course students to take the provisional license exam is the best way to inspire confidence. They hope showcasing the raw talent of young heroes will uplift the public's spirits and not worry too much about All Might's declining appearance. Izuku, already unimpressed, crossed his arms. Sounds more like desperation than a solid plan. You're not wrong, Nezu sighed and acknowledged. It's a poor strategy, childish at best, and potentially disastrous at worst. But I suspect the Commission has an ulterior motive for rushing first years into the spotlight. My theories, unfortunately, are far from optimistic. Izuku's face remained unchanged. He was no longer surprised by any of this, and this concerns me. How? I'm not in the hero course. Nezu leaned a little forward. After the League of Villains attack on Cocoon City, which claimed the lives of several pro-heroes, there is reason to believe they are planning another large-scale assault. The provisional license exam, with its multiple locations and concentration of young heroes, would be a prime target. Izuku quickly understood the dean's meaning once more, but this time he decided not to respond. Nezu went on. To prepare, we're doubling security at each exam site. Pro-heroes will be stationed at every location, along with select third-year students who already hold their provisional licenses, such as Tagata here. Izuku furrowed his brow. His eyes shifted to Bubble Girl. And you want me to, what, tag along as a medic? He asked. Or are you asking me to babysit my former classmates? Izuku's tone did not disturb Nezu's faint smile. See it how you will, Mr. Midoriya. But my priority is the safety of my students. The Commission's decisions are placing them in danger, and I intend to mitigate that risk however I can. Your abilities would be invaluable. Mirio added, we promise this isn't some kind of trick, in his typically jovial but earnest tone. We really believe something bad is going to happen, and we want to be prepared. And well, you're really strong. I don't see the lack of security, Izuku shot back. I'm strong? You're the one people are looking to as my junior? A mocking, hooray for learning how to punch much harder, was Mirio's response. Healing people quicker will always be the coolest power. He's not wrong. A second youthful hero is much more necessary for hero academies, said Bubble Girl. Izuku pinched the bridge of his nose to suppress the urge to moan. Fine, he finally muttered. I'll play along with your game, but I swear, if I end up with a surprise provisional license after all this, I will turn into a volcano. Nezu nodded and said, noted, his eyes sparkling slyly. The hideout of the new League of Villains in Mino City resembled a dilapidated warehouse that had been decaying for 4 decades. The interior wasn't much better, at least not on the surface, and the exterior was a crumbling husk of broken windows and rusted metal. However, there was more to those who belonged than first glances revealed. Beneath the dilapidated building was a bunker, a secret hiding place designed to serve as a villain's penthouse. It wasn't ostentatious, but it was cozy, a haven for people who enjoyed chaos. Members of the League could relax here, licking their wounds and reveling in their most recent triumphs over alleged heroes. Those triumphs had never felt more sweet to some. The most ardent of them all, Spinner, was still celebrating their assault on Cocoon City. 13 heroes or no more. But the violence wasn't the only thing that happened. Prior to putting their victims to death for the world to witness, the League had unearthed their darkest secrets, revealing every transgression and hypocrisy. The morality of their supposed protectors had been called into question by the populace. The ensuing public uproar was quickly subdued by the police. It had been a brilliant play, a blow to the flimsy pretense of justice. A reminder of the justice of Stain's philosophy. However, the League was at a standstill in spite of their achievements. Their last attack's high was wearing off, and they were starting to feel the urge to attack again. Spinner drummed his fingers on a couch's shabby armrest and asked, what's next? With a knife in her hand, Himiko Toga continued, and where is Stainy? They said he's one of us, but we haven't even seen him yet. You'd think he'd want to join in on the fun. Tamura clenched his fingers over the armrest of his usual chair. His voice was tinged with frustration as he muttered, I've been trying to get in touch with him, but the bastard's gone radio silent. The League had seen. On a couple of occasions, they had witnessed Tamura attempting to call someone but receiving no response. On 3 different occasions, he had even become so irate that he unintentionally damaged his phone. The last time he'd lost it, he'd stormed off after launching into a colorful tirade about Stain. It was easy to sell the lie that Tamura was upset about trying, and failing, to get in touch with Stain so that he could come to the League and meet his new followers, while All for One was putting the plan to kill Stain into action. In reality, Tamura was putting on an act that he was selling perfectly well because anger was his default emotion. However, some of Tamura's actions were sincere because he was determined to kill Stain. He was playing one of his favorite video games when Kurogiri came warping into his room one day with good news, so the waiting is over. The Nomu said, young master, the trap has been set. All that's left are your orders. With a twisted smile on his lips, Tamura shut off his game console and hurried to the main hall, where the other leaguers were waiting. He yelled, all right, listen up, and immediately caught everyone's attention. We've got a mission. Twice was the first to respond, crossing his arms. Oh, good, I was getting bored. Bad, actually, I was enjoying my break. But good, I want to do something. Tamura's customary contradiction was hardly acknowledged. We're going on a rescue operation. They were unprepared for that. Rescues were not done by the League. Tamura clarified, one of our contacts found out where Stain is. The show-off is on another one of his solo purges, but sadly, the heroes found out too. Right now, he's walking straight into a trap, and he doesn't even know it. The group was shaken by that realization. Dobby's face took on a chilly, unreadable look. Even the arsonist, who was rarely interested in anyone outside the League, appeared unimpressed by the prospect of the hero killer being taken out by some egotistical pro. Toga smiled, her golden eyes glimmering with excitement. Oh, this is getting interesting. Spinner's fists clenched. We can't let them take him down. There was no dispute. Stain was more than just another villain. He was a legend and a symbol whose beliefs had ignited the fire for them all. The pro-heroes would claim an undeserved victory if he fell. Then Spinner demanded, where is he? Tamura grinned broadly. Musutafu, where the Takoba National Stadium was located. One of the locations where the Provisional Hero License exam is being held. Class 1A would be traveling to the same location. Their timing couldn't be more ideal, but the League was unaware of it. Furthermore, they were unaware that Stain had been set up from the beginning, something that Tamura and Kurogiri would never disclose to them. Saving the hero killer wasn't the only goal here. All for One had this plan. It was already predetermined that Stain would perish there, slain by the same, righteous, guardians he detested. And the League would be furious when that occurred. They would band together more fiercely than ever under Tamura's leadership. Their rallying cry would be the death of Stain. The League would emerge more powerful, and at last, Tamura Shigaraki would emerge as the leader he was destined to be. Izuku had a lot of things he would prefer to be doing at the moment. Like savoring the unique opportunity to spend a whole day without running the risk of running into his old classmates. Rather, he was stalled on his way to them. The fact that he wasn't traveling with them was the only bright spot. Instead, he ended up with the big three in Mirio's vehicle. Like all the other times he had found himself in this predicament, Izuku was clueless as to how it had happened. It was starting to become a pattern, and a disturbingly regular one. He was certain that at least one of them was a stalker at this rate. He didn't have time to mention it because he was preoccupied with the intriguing briefcase that was resting on Najire's lap. It appeared that the students' hero costumes were kept in one of UA's standard issue cases. One issue, though, was that the big three were already dressed like heroes. The only person wearing a formal suit who didn't belong was him. Sure, it was comfortable, but considering the company he was in, it was still a strange decision. Izuku started to inquire about the briefcase, only, as usual, Najire interrupted him. She practically hummed as she asked, so, are you excited to see all these students competing to get their provisional licenses? There are gonna be so many cool quirks, right? Izuku gave a flat response. No, I'm the farthest thing from excited. Not a moment's hesitation. Najire let out a real gasp of horror. She pouted, what? You're such a killjoy, Midoriya. But wait, you totally brought those infamous notebooks of yours, right? Izuku let out a sigh. I always carry a notebook with me. See? You were excited? Najire exclaimed with a sense of victory. A rare sound, a frustrated sigh from Tamaki, cut through their antics before Izuku could correct them. The third year, who is usually quiet, moved in his chair with a look of real annoyance on his face. Can you two not? I was sleeping. All Mirio needed was that. Oh man, Tamaki always gets bolder when someone ruins his beauty sleep. He laughed. With a groan, Amajiki covered his face with his hands. This is the last time I take a ride with both of you. Izuku just rubbed his temples and let out a sigh, but Mirio and Najire laughed at that. We had a long day ahead of us. Soon after, the group reached Takoba National Stadium. They saw multiple buses unloading pupils from other hero academies as soon as they got out of the vehicle. Izuku quickly recognized the new students' uniforms as his eyes swept over them. Shikatsu, Ci, Isamu. He felt sick to his stomach when he saw the Isamu students. His gaze fell on one individual in particular. Romero Fujimi. With his sharp teeth bared, the zombie-looking bastard was looking around the stadium with a childlike smile. Izuku vowed that Bakugo's repulsive conceit was the only thing that could match his enthusiasm. Izuku turned around right away and climbed back into the vehicle. Najire blinked, perplexed. Midoriya, what are you doing? Izuku spoke in a flat tone. I'm not getting out until the Isamu idiots are gone. With her face now awkwardly stuck to the windshield, Najire pouted. Oh, come on, they've already left. He looked at her sardonically. I know when people are lying to my face. Izuku reluctantly got out of the car after several minutes of persuasion, mostly from Mirio, who assured him that Tamaki would go back to sleep and become even more grumpy if Midoriya didn't get out. By chance, he also happened to pass Bubble Girl and his former 1A classmates on his way to the stadium. Yaoyorozu was the first to call him Midoriya. The others' eyes widened as they followed her gaze. Some started whispering right away. Midoriya was here, but why? Until Bubble Girl responded on their behalf, the question lingered. The dean wanted someone with healing abilities on standby, she said. And it's estimated that this exam will be unorthodox. A tense Kaminari shifted around, obviously uneasy. Is it really okay for Midoriya to be here? Considering that he could. Before he could say anything more, Kyoka silenced him with a quick jab in the side. Don't. A few of their peers were clearly tense. They were aware. They were aware because Hagakure had heard Midoriya tell the Big Three about Heat Esper's significant disadvantage. She had also informed them. The disadvantages were worst for the strongest quirks. What about Midoriya's? It was horrifying. He could move independently, and Japan had another atomic bomb. Ochako had wished for months that Heat Esper had been born with Izuku. That, without anyone standing in his way, he could have fulfilled his lifelong dream of becoming a hero. Now, though, she now wished that he had not changed his quirks. Because she hadn't desired this for him at all. But none of them were acknowledged by Midoriya. He just strode by, his face unreadable, making his way directly to the stadium. It was colder than it had to be. Most of the bodies weren't even complete, so it wasn't for preservation, but maybe to cover up the stench of blood, charred fur, and ripped flesh. The room's shape was small and twisted beneath the metal tables that stretched across it, each covered in sheets and plastic. 2 crows, a retriever, 12 strays, a festive red collar with a bell is still on a family cat. Dean Nezu stood motionless on the other side of the room. His glassy eyes stared at the partially covered body in front of him, a ferret with its head still in place but blood gathered under its ears. Gaunt in civilian clothes, Toshinori Yagi stood to Nezu's right, his hands crammed into his oversized hoodie's pockets. With his arms folded and his brows furrowed, Detective Naomasa Tsukauchi leaned against the stainless steel wall behind them. There was silence, until the clink of a scalpel being placed on a tray broke the stillness. With a tight expression and soaked gloves, the lead medical examiner turned away from her work. Before she spoke, she adjusted her glasses. I'll be frank, when the attack stopped a month ago, we assumed the killer had moved on or left the prefecture entirely. But the frequency didn't vanish, it just slowed. We're still getting 1 to 2 bodies per week. She pointed to the most recent 3 corpses. The methods remained unchanged. Overload via direct electrical stimulation, specifically through the cranium. The voltage is concentrated at the brain stem and cerebral cortex. Very precise, almost surgical in nature, but brutal. Toshinori scowled. And the cause of death in the earlier victims? Same as these, but unlike those, these had their heads intact. She flipped on the tablet on the table and drew down a projection screen. Partially rebuilt from one of the more intact bodies, a brain scan emerged. These are cross-sectional scans of the cerebrum, mostly the prefrontal cortex and motor areas. What we've found here is, well, interesting. With a sharpened gaze, Naomasa said, define, interesting. Carefully. Clearly aware of Nezu's presence, the examiner hesitated. The dean had not moved, not even blinking or twitching his whiskers. The neurological tissue is exhibiting unusual patterns that are indicative of an attempt at neural reprogramming. The anterior cingulate cortex and the basal ganglia showed patterns of synaptic burn, the areas of the brain in charge of making decisions, controlling emotions, and carrying out actions. To put it simply, an attempt was made to impose new behavioral pathways on these animals. Mind control, mumbled Naomasa. Slowly, the examiner nodded. Crude. Intrusive, however, yes. Someone changed or erased conscious behavior with directed electricity, most likely using a specialized tool or a quirk similar to electrokinesis. They were attempting to rewire the command systems in the brain, and failing miserably. This wasn't just slaughter, Toshinori said, his hands clenching slightly in his pockets. These were trials. Exactly, said the examiner, do it. And whoever is responsible for this is becoming more proficient at it, based on the rudimentary method and modifications made over time. At last Nezu's voice, as smooth as ever, conveyed nothing but cold calculation, neither grief nor anger. Never was the intention to hurt animals. That was simply the price of failing. Therefore, We are not the target species. Humans are involved. The others remained silent for a while. With a sigh that revealed his disgust, Naomasa broke the silence. Obviously. Start small, experiment, and then increase. Why not try it on a human next? You can control a dog's instincts, suppress its fear response, and force it to ignore pain. Quote. His face was solemn as he turned to face Nezu. We're fortunate that you are the only quirked animal that the general public is aware of, sir. I hate to say this. Maybe they want to control more than just humans if this whack job is testing psychological override techniques on sentient beings. Toshinori cast a sidelong glance at Nezu. The chimera's stance remained unchanged, but there was a violent, thick tension in the air around him, like a string being slowly and steadily pulled back, just waiting to break. Nezu, Toshinori said quietly, we'll catch them, but I understand how this must feel. We'll put an end to them. They used my kind to train for yours, Nezu said, keeping his gaze fixed on the ferret. They won't live long enough to regret it, I promise. A pause. No matter what we want, if the objective is human manipulation, we have a limited window before this person gets it right, Naomasa said, clearing his throat. Furthermore, I doubt that anything with a tail will be used in their upcoming test. His phone buzzed just as he was about to add more. His scowl grew as he looked down. Speaking of impending catastrophes, I recently received an update. The clamor about the devolved salvation has intensified. It's already being referred to as the awakening in some underground forums. Can you guess which name is popular once more? Quote. Midoriya. Toshinori rubbed his temples. Yes, Naomasa said, nodding. In addition to Singularity Surge, Sleeper Phenomenon, and regrettably, End Times Protocol. Toshinori let out a breath via his nostrils. Let me guess. No riots, but plenty of people in the streets. Civil unrest is growing. Most of the Humorize activity is overseas, but I'd bet money we've got at least one domestic splinter group. It's a powder keg. Toshinori spoke in a low, resentful tone. Wonderful. I'm not sure I can fix a fractured society anymore, but I can punch someone. That's a start. Naomasa smiled aridly. Let's just make sure we're punching the right psychopath. Nezu finally moved away from the body behind them. As silent as snow, no one followed him out of the room, but the others watched. Words could not have conveyed the weight of the silence he left behind. With its written and practical sections, the Provisional Hero License exam was similar to the UA University entrance exam. The Big Three claimed that the written exam was notorious for being one of the most difficult mental tasks for would-be heroes. Students from UA, who had to take some of the most difficult academic exams in Japan, complained that the migraines were worse than anything they had ever experienced. The way some of them came out, you'd think they'd fought a villain who only attacked their brains, Mirio laughed. More like a villain who convinced them that 2 + 2 = fish, Tamaki murmured. There were 2 distinct stages to the practical portion, which was much more intense. Each participant was given 3 circular targets to place anywhere on their body as long as they were visible during the first stage of the competitive survival test. The bottoms of feet and armpits were forbidden. Additionally, they were given 6 orange balls, which they were to hit all 3 of their targets with in order to eliminate opponents. A participant was removed from the test once they had reached all of their goals. That's how it was supposed to go, anyway. The heroes and senior students saw a serious problem with the way the test was administered right away. Something's off, Tamaki remarked, squinting at the enormous number of competitors. Today, an unprecedented 1,540 students participated in the competition. What was remarkable, though, was that 1,100 students passed the written exam, clearly taking the proctors and heroes by surprise. This isn't normal, noticed Mirio. The HPSC must have lowered the difficulty of the written test. This time, the commission had obviously altered the test to inflate the success rate, which should normally be about 50%. The issue: there weren't enough targets and balls for everyone because the practical exam was only designed for 750 students. The commission improvised rather than appropriately modifying the test. The 1,100 pupils were divided into 2 enormous groups, one for those with flashy quirks and the other for those with less striking quirks. The goal was clear: make it easier for stronger students to defeat weaker ones. If not for one significant flaw, the crude and manipulative strategy might have succeeded. Despite the rigging, UA students, especially those in Class 1A, remained extremely vulnerable. Anticipating this, Bubble Girl had attempted to alert her students to the risks associated with the test. She was particularly worried about Shoto because he was a liability due to his obstinate refusal to use his entire quirk. Nezu had been informed by her that. I argued that he shouldn't take the exam at all. Shinso and Mineta weren't ready, and neither was he. If he refuses to use his full power, he's going to fail. Worse, he's going to endanger his classmates. The commission overruled Nezu's agreement. So, as was to be expected, catastrophe struck. Todoroki's initial strategy, which involved freezing everything around him and resorting to his ice-based tactics, backfired spectacularly when the exam began. Knowing they would be outclassed, the weaker quirk students had already banded together to oppose the more flamboyant and powerful students. Because they had practiced high-impact attacks like Todoroki's, they came together and launched a counterattack as soon as he released his ice. Todoroki was overpowered in a matter of minutes, his own ice almost freezing him to death. Due to Todoroki's severe hypothermia, the proctors had to step in and he would have been taken to a nearby hospital. However, Izuku helped by healing and warming him up. The remainder of Class 1A held firm in spite of this devastating setback, using the ice and counterattacks to their advantage to run and hide while carefully picking up opponents. Only Shoto would fail the first section of the practical exam because, despite their flaws, the strategies were effective. Nevertheless, those observing the mayhem thought 1A lacked. The other members of UA stayed close from the stadium seats, and Mirio grimaced in pain. I have never seen you cringe like that, Nejire said. He rubbed his temples and muttered, that's because I've never seen such a crude display of teamwork in my entire life. Yes, they managed to pass the first part, but seriously, how did these freshmen survive a real villain attack? I asked myself that question every time I look at them, Izuku said with a shrug. Bubble Girl shook her head and sighed. Well, at least all that hard work I put into most of them wasn't a total waste. Mirio said, you were their only saving grace, while observing her with compassion. And if they fail regardless, it will not be because of you. You warned them. The commission just didn't care. Izuku, meanwhile, showed no sympathy. Seeing his old classmates barely make it through only confirmed what he already knew. They had no chance at all without him or Bakugo to carry them. His red eyes glinted with laughter as he grinned. How much I've improved without them, and how far they've fallen. It had been a long time since the hero killer had experienced the joy of happiness. Any semblance of joy had been tempered by disappointment after disappointment, leaving only the icy clarity of his mission. Each time he thought he might remember the feeling, it vanished the instant he recalled his mission, to rid the world of those who dared to call themselves heroes. Before real heroes could emerge, society had to be soaked in the blood of hypocrites. Even Stain had to acknowledge that things had been going surprisingly well, even though he rarely gave himself the satisfaction of optimism. Every other hero academy has been scrutinized since the scandals at UA University were made public. At last, the world had started to wonder if these institutions, which were supposed to teach protectors, had been harboring criminals among their students. Never had Stain questioned it. He was aware that the system was broken, enabling vile liars like Bakugo and shameful scammers like Aizawa to prosper based only on their unadulterated fighting prowess. It should come as no surprise that the skeletons of other academies were soon discovered. Ketsubutsu, Sei, and Isamu had all produced pro-heroes with troubled pasts that their alma mater had discreetly buried to preserve their honor. Their sins, however, were more difficult to atone for. Before they could further tarnish the title of hero, Stain had seen their filth, condemned them, and slashed them down. What's the best part? People had begun to take notice. The public started to see the flaws in the system and start to doubt it more and more. The change in perception was gradual but unmistakable. Desperation was driving those in positions of authority to fight for control, trust in the Hero Commission was eroding, and confidence in pro-heroes was declining. This was ideal, because only those who were truly deserving would step up to restore the illusion of safety once it was broken. Stain had already spared a few heroes who, in his opinion, were hardly deserving of their titles, but he doubted any would ever attain the heights of All Might. Maybe they would step up to the plate when the time came. Even though he had won, Stain wasn't feeling well today. He was the victim today. His search for a so-called pro-hero who had long been known to be an abusive father had begun like any other. His title should have been revoked for such a transgression, but the system had once again defended its own. Stain would judge him if the law didn't. But his own hunt had been cut short before he could attack. They were numerous. They were massive beings, bigger than the average man. They might have looked like heteromorphs at first, but Stain knew better. Their actions were too unpredictable, and their violence was too unbridled. They were clearly drugged, high on trigger, and their minds dominated by bestial rage, as evidenced by the chemical odor in the air. More than that, though, he understood the utter savagery of their actions. Yes, he was aware of this insanity. Superior evildoers. Those miserable products of the so-called villain factory, an organization he had thought had been destroyed. And yet here they were, still alive and well, demonstrating the incapacity of the so-called heroes who had fallen short. They were now pursuing him. 6 of them had already been felled by Stain, but the other 4 were different, more powerful, more resilient. His right arm was broken by a fortunate blow from one of them, leaving it useless and hanging. He could only use his mouth and left hand to wield his blades now, and although he had survived worse, the chances were decreasing every second. Then things started to go south. One of the animals parted its lips and took a breath, but it wasn't just air. The light surrounding them was disappearing as it was pulled into the depths of its maw. Unnaturally long shadows engulfed the alleyway in a spooky blackness. The sun appeared to have been taken from the sky. The world went dark for Stain. But he was more worried about something else than the 4 monsters in front of him. It was the figure behind him, the presence he had not yet noticed. And beneath his feet the wide emptiness opens. A bitter tang that clung to Izuku's throat as much as the guilt curling in his stomach was the night air's stench of smoke and scorched concrete. Outside the ruins of Takoba National Stadium, he sat hunched over against the chilly brick wall, his face streaked with ash and his back hurting. Beyond the parking lot, the broken skyline was still glowing dimly with embers. The clamor of sirens in the distance was muffled by the turmoil in his mind. "Tagata?" Izuku asked in a raspy voice that was nearly overpowered by the sound of the rescue trucks. Mirio turned, his arms mottled by a few burns and his jacket scorched. He tried to smile, but his usual optimism had faded. "Yeah, Midoriya." Izuku let out a tight breath. "On a scale of 1 to 20, how screwed am I after all this?" Mirio gave his neck a gentle rub. "Well," he lowered himself to eye level. "In my honest opinion, overworked student studying under a pro who works hand in hand with the police, dealing with precision, paperwork, and perfection. Your best shot is probably to sign a plea deal with the HPSC's Madam President before they decide you're a liability." Izuku let his head thud back against the wall and moaned. Fantastic. Behind them, the stadium resembled a battlefield. This was not how it was meant to end. The purpose of the Provisional Hero License exam was to serve as a formality, a meticulously regulated simulation. It had been held at several locations throughout Japan, and Takoba was meant to be his familiar and home base. It had gone well at first. The first round's urban mock-up was already battered, with its artificial skyscrapers that were supposed to collapse safely. The goal of the second phase, which involved rescue missions with Help Us company actors portraying civilians, was to increase pressure without actually posing a threat. However, supposed to, had lost its meaning. As instructed by Recovery Girl, he had remained near Najire, prepared to assist in the event that there were actual injuries. As exam proctors, Mirio and Tamaki hovered around, observing the applicants from the other universities. Everything was going well until Stain appeared like a specter from an urban legend, at which point everything caught fire. When Izuku closed his eyes, he could still see the bewilderment that flashed across Stain's eyes, as if even he was unsure of his purpose. Then the yelling started, students started to disperse, and HUC actors broke character to run away. The experts then hurried in, with Endeavor at the forefront, his flames battling Stain's craziness. When Shigaraki and the League showed up, their derisive cries reverberating off shattered walls, "We've come for Stain," only served to intensify the mayhem. The slaughter had occurred. There are 4 dead pros. 6 students suffered injuries. Additionally, Stain. Izuku took a deep breath. The warmth emanating from him made his hands shake. He had cured as many as possible. He had assisted the taller, raven black-haired Ketsubutsu student who resembled him uncannily in removing Stain's blade from his abdomen and used his quirk to seal the wound as if it were insignificant. However, he was unable to change what transpired. Glass crunched beneath footsteps. Bubble Girl, Najire, and Tamaki joined him, their faces drawn, their uniforms tattered, as Mirio's car door clicked. None of them appeared to have won. Simply worn out. A group of policemen walked by with stretchers covered in black sheets. Where the blood had dried, the cloth clung. Izuku's stomach knotted up from one stretcher. The breeze carried a faint odor of charred flesh. It wasn't disgust that made him look short, from its meaning. With a softer, almost begging tone, Najire knelt next to him. "Hey, it's going to be okay. You'll see, we'll get through this." Izuku's mouth curled into a smirk devoid of humor. "No, we won't. Stain wasn't just some thug. He was the villain, the one the underground adored. He even had hundreds of citizens who supported him over the heroes, probably more. And I killed him." His tone was bitter, detached. "There's no making this all right." The others stopped talking. Another siren screamed in the distance. And the world had just changed, Izuku knew with a certainty that made him feel hollow. It was only going to get worse. The world screamed in 4K instead of moving in whispers. Only official statements and survivor testimonies disseminated information about the League of Villains' initial attack on the USJ months ago. The majority of the public's knowledge at the time was filtered by pro-hero public relations teams. Right now, every conflict was live-streamed, and every citizen carried a camera in their pocket. Thus, there were a dozen different perspectives when Takoba National Stadium turned into a battlefield. It was impossible to ignore the videos. As a new Nomu, later named Hood, launched itself into battle against Endeavor, grainy phone footage showed plumes of fire tearing across the stands. The nation's number 2 hero was forced to battle like a cornered animal, burning half the stadium in his desperation as flames raged high enough to scorch the steel beams. Even concession stand employees, actors, and students were able to escape during the chaotic but miraculous evacuation. The majority of them, some, such as the UA Big Three, remained to engage in combat. So did a few obstinate students from different universities, as well as individual employees who were still able to stand. There was no other option, so they stood their ground, not because they were brave. And there was a green-haired boy running on every shaky video feed, fleeing. Izuku Midoriya was seen in the video running away from the mayhem, looking pale and frenzied. He was nowhere to be seen for 30 minutes. It appeared to be cowardice to some. However, another video that showed his return surfaced, and this one went viral much more than the others. Midoriya fell into the battlefield like a red comet gliding across the smoke-choked sky. Heat shimmered off his body as if he had been reborn by lightning itself, and sparks burst all around him. Just in time, he grabbed Muscular and pulled the villain away from Gang Orca, who was lying on the ground bleeding and half-conscious. With a thunderclap-like sound, the impact buried Muscular beneath 2 buildings. The video cut to yelling. The League had left by the time the dust settled. Muscular was the only one captured. 4 heroes were not so fortunate. Hours later, their bodies were found in the wreckage. However, neither the fire nor the Nomu, nor even Muscular's loss, was the most startling video. Stain, the hero killer and self-proclaimed savior of justice, was shown in the grainy video writhing on the ground with electricity crackling over his skin. His cries were terrible and human. The former quirkless student was standing above him, his eyes vacant, lightning dancing from his hands as he burned the notorious murderer until his body froze. No background, no words, without hesitation, simple execution. Almost immediately, Japan's most famous news anchor, Daikaku Miyagi, went live. He attempted to soften the story with his usual composure, euphemizing and suffusing the leaked footage with layers of conjecture. However, the harm had already been done. Public sentiment shifted. The rhetoric of the League had gained momentum following the events in Kaken City, where 13 heroes had been exposed for corruption prior to their deaths. A lot of people now doubted the hero system's reliability. Stain's twisted belief that only the genuinely deserving should be called hero had spread like a poison, particularly among the marginalized. He became a martyr after his death. Now, Midoriya's name was inscribed on all of Japan's extremist forums. As a target, not as a hero. A hypocrite, a murderer. However, wasn't he also the boy who rescued 3 Shiketsu students who were in danger? The one who said he had given up on being a hero but continued to fight. The mob didn't care about that detail. The Hero Public Safety Commission held a press conference 2 days later. Under a flurry of flashing cameras stood its icy and unflinching chairwoman, Sumui Zenkokuna. She made a clinical statement. All actions taken within Takoba National Stadium were in the interest of self-defense. No student or pro-hero will face charges for their conduct. It served as a legal buffer. Not much more. Those who were disenchanted with the hero system and those who worshipped Stain were not placated. However, it did not deter the general public's belief in heroes. For every skeptic, 10 people clung tenaciously to the hope that someone would come to their rescue when the dark came. And there was no mistaking the approaching darkness. The hero rejection incident in Takoba was not your typical skirmish. The shot was a warning. The rebellion's flames were already spreading, and Stain's blood had just begun to dry. The extremists had found their martyr, the League had tasted blood, and a animal killer was still at large. Japan was perched on the brink of something unsightly. A boy who never asked to be anyone's symbol stood in the center of it all. Hell would not wait for Japan to be prepared, it was already here. After fleeing the stadium, the League went back to their new hiding place in Mino City. The smell of rust and antiseptic filled the air. With his shirt peeled back and his skin blistered from Izuku's electrical arc scorching his ribs, Tamura Shigaraki sat slouched on a cot. He was treated with unnerving zeal by a new Nomu. Even by their nightmarish standards, it was more ugly than most Nomu. Its hands glowed faintly with healing warmth, but its skin sagged in uneven folds, its mismatched eyes bulging in opposite directions. Every time it touched Tamura's burns with its palms, the pain subsided a little and was replaced by an odd itching sensation. He muttered, "Penelope," recalling the name the doctor had given it. "Ugly thing, but I guess you help." Unaware of the insult, the Nomu tilted its head and chirped like a happy nurse. The worst of his burns were already knitting, and Tamura grimaced, but he acknowledged to himself that the creature's quirk was effective. Still, he was in a bad mood. Tamura's pride hurt more than his wounds, but the mission had been successful. Stain was dead, and his cult-like supporters were already furious. Tamura's hands twitched, wanting to break something, anything, as he watched Midoriya fly back into the stadium like a fiery red comet, humiliating muscular and shattering gang Orca's assailant like a toy. He noticed a crackle coming from the tiny TV on the distant wall. The signal was weak but distinct enough for Tamura to hear the low, greasy voice of All for One filling his room. His master purred, "An excellent performance, Tamura. Truly worthy of an Academy Award." The grieving friend, desperate to save Stain, swore vengeance upon the oppressive heroes who struck him down. "You moved even my old heart. You've secured their loyalty." Tamura laughed sourly. "Yeah, I even put on those ridiculous artist gloves mid-battle to make it look like I was protecting him. They ate it up. Twice the respect, none the wiser." His tone cracked with rage. "But it still pisses me off. I wanted to drag that heat bastard through the floorboards. How the hell does someone with a fire quirk shoot lightning? I almost got fried." A low chuckle, like shifting gravel, came from All for One. Young Midoriya's quirk is far more sophisticated than a simple firestarter. What he wields is a marvel of physics. The Seebeck effect, Tamura, occurs when thermal energy is converted into electrical energy. First law of thermodynamics. Energy cannot be created or destroyed, only transformed. Midoriya is an esper of heat itself. Anything thermal bends to his will. Tamura gritted his teeth and blinked. So he's a walking power plant. Great. Which is why we must be patient. I would love to add such a quirk to my collection, but now that the public has seen him kill Stain, he'll be hounded by zealots and hunted by the mob. Let the chaos ripen. All for One went on without incident. Tamura's lip curled, but his anger was calmed by the prospect of more retribution. "There's also the matter of One for All," proceeded his master. "We have full confirmation that Mirio Tagata is its ninth bearer. I suspected as much since the Island incident, hence the gift I gave Wolfram, but his display of All Might's strength at Takoba leaves no doubt." Tamura scowled. "If that exhibitionist has One for All, then why's All Might still around? Shouldn't he be quirkless now?" All for One said, "Not entirely, with their usual patience. One for All has been stockpiling energy for nearly 2 centuries. Even after passing it on, some embers remain in him. They'll fade with time, which is why he's seen less and less in the field. But we needn't wait for nature to take its course." Glee darkened the villain's voice. "We'll expose him, show the world his true, emaciated form. Strip the false symbol of peace of his illusion of invincibility. And then, we'll burn the faith people place in heroes to the ground." At last, Tamura's rage subsided into a slow, excited smile. Now his hands twitched with anticipation rather than frustration. He was excited at the prospect of tearing off All Might's mask. Midoriya was able to wait. "Fine," he said in a hoarse, low voice, but he was now grinning. "Let's ruin him. Let's show them what their symbol really looks like." And All for One laughed somewhere in the background of the TV's static hum. Except for the slight hum of the city outside, the office was silent. Behind his enormous mahogany desk, Endeavor sat with the dim glow of the skyline reflected in his window's glass. The quiet bothered him. Quiet meant peace to most heroes, but to Enji Todoroki, it meant his thoughts could suffocate him. The week had not been good. It hadn't been a good year, to be honest. Everything had fallen apart since him, the son who was supposed to be his legacy. Shoto had been created to take the top spot away from that smug jerk All Might, to succeed where Enji had failed. Nevertheless, the boy repeatedly turned him down. It was Shoto's refusal to use his power, not his lack of it. The flames that Enji had meticulously chiseled into him on the left side of his body were still cold. Overcompensating until his lips turned blue and frost stuck to his breath, Shoto obstinately clung to the ice from his mother's bloodline. Hypothermia was a specter that hung over the boy's shoulder, not some far-off medical term. He would eventually succumb to organ failure as a result of his refusal to accept his purpose. However, that wasn't the worst of it at all. Enji's hands continued to clench into fists at the memory. Hosu. Shoto should have learned a valuable lesson from seeing his father take down a dangerous killer during the hunt for Stain. Rather, it turned into a disaster. Enji discovered a harsh reality when Stain killed Ingenium's brother in an alleyway. The boy he had raised to be his masterpiece was not only defiant but heartless. Shortly before the fatal blow, Tenya Iida sent a desperate distress signal, which Dean Nezu presumably stole from the phones and uploaded to his university's students' phones for emergency use. It went to Shoto. He was close. He also disregarded it. His son had confessed, so Enji had not realized this. Shoto cursed the notification and almost shut down his phone to let him know. Enji could have saved the stupid Iida and the pro-hero native and captured Stain if Shoto had just said something. All he had instead was one more failure to put on the long list. The Todoroki name would end if that secret were ever made public. When Enji learned, he had wanted to burn something, someone. Rather, he had burned his practice area until the steel became distorted. Mercy wasn't shown, it was self-control. And the strikes continued. Mirio Tagata, the alleged heir of All Might. The fact that Endeavor's best informants could not find any blood relations was negligible. Even the angry smile on Tagata's face was a perfect replica of All Might in training. The arcs of blue lightning surrounding him and his newfound strength were not explained by penetration alone. Either way, the resemblance was too striking to ignore. Did the boy have any complicity? Or is Sir Night-Eye fattened for slaughter, or is All Might just another lamb? In any case, the world was beginning to love him. He was also a threat because of that. Then came the Nomu, the monsters of the League, creatures that have multiple quirks. A biological impossibility because, as has been said repeatedly, a single quirk, regardless of how weak the person is, puts a lot of strain on the body. Muscle failure and a sharp decline in stamina are only a couple of the adverse effects. Despite this, it appears that these creatures are coping with the stress without any remaining life to burn away. Enji's awful conclusion, walking corpses, must be accurate. Hood was the worst of these creatures. It plagued Enji's sleepless nights. Technically, he had won that fight. He hadn't killed it, though. Hood and its master had slithered off, and Enji was certain that it would be more powerful the next time they met. The League would, too. Damn it all, a furious and vindictive Enji said. That should have worried him the most. However, no, it was a boy, not All Might or the League, that loomed largest in his mind. A green-haired boy with a fire quirk more powerful than his own. Midoriya Izuku. At Takoba, where the flame hero himself faltered, he somehow outperformed Enji despite being the son of a weakling couple with nothing noteworthy about them. Because of his quirk, Hisashi Midoriya is able to breathe fire, and he ignites it using the plasma in his blood rather than fuel. At first glance, this fire breath appears to be impressive, but it has a major drawback. Hisashi developed anemia as a result of his blood's decreased ability to carry oxygen. How can something as destructive as heat esper be created by such a disgrace to fire quirks worldwide, and Izuku's mother isn't exactly noteworthy. The Midoriya family has garbage legacies on both sides. Furthermore, the young man wasn't even a hero. Izuku Midoriya publicly disregarded the system and gave up on the path. But Enji didn't believe it. The icy, vindictive fire in Midoriya's eyes was still visible to him. It wasn't over, whatever he was planning. It would never end. An uncontrollable chill ran down his spine at the thought. There was an impending event. Something worse than the shame of Aizawa, worse than the fall of Bakugo. If Midoriya is allowed to continue, the world will burn. Enji whispered into the empty office, "I'll stop you," with a low growl that was more promise than swearing. The fact that the boy had rescued him from Hood's talons didn't matter to him. When the future of hero society itself was at stake, debt was meaningless. The city lights outside flickered on the glass. Endeavor's shadow hung inside, stooped and agitated. The flame hero felt a chill seep through him despite his fire. In the main staff room at UA, the atmosphere was more somber than the storm clouds that were gathering outside. A news broadcast of the Takoba hero rejection incident was being replayed on a huge screen that lit up the conference table. Grainy footage showed students fighting like seasoned pros, masked villains running away, and flames and destruction. The weight of it was felt by everyone in the room. It was chaos condensed. Nezu finally chirped, well, in his falsely upbeat tone, standing on his chair with his tail swishing. On the bright side, people can't point fingers at UA for this one. We weren't the primary target, and our students, the best and brightest, forced the League of Villains to fall back. Public confidence in them will take a dent. Or it'll twist the other way, Snipe stated icily, his eyes narrowed and concealed by his helmet. Because one of ours killed a villain. Whether or not the public knows, it happened. That headline writes itself. Tragic, yes, Smintos growled, his hands clasped like stone as he leaned forward. But Detective Tsukauchi confirmed it was self-defense. He questioned Midoriya thoroughly. It wasn't planned, just a desperate act on impulse. That matters. Mike, who is typically the loudest person in a room, startled everyone by muttering in a low, almost raspy voice. Doesn't change that blood's on his hands now. Stain's blood. At least, poor Tenya was avenged. He was not corrected. Nobody was able to. Even though Stain was no longer alive, the Iida family's suffering persisted. His passing had, if anything, made Midoriya's predicament much more difficult. Nezu's high-pitched voice was deceptively cheerful as he said, the deeper problem is obvious. None of Class 1A obtained their provisional hero licenses. Worse, the League struck unchallenged again, waltzing into a populated district like ghosts. No place feels safe. The public is starting to believe we can't protect them. Toshinori muttered, and maybe they're right, from the other end of the table. Thin fingers intertwined, his gaunt figure hunched in his chair. We keep reacting. They keep escalating. And young Midoriya, he's stuck in the middle. Ectoplasm's arms were folded. He was ordered to retreat. And he did, for a while. Then he returned 30 minutes later like a falling star, blasting into the battlefield without warning. With yet another range of emotions, Toshinori stated, I talked to Naomasa about it. He won't reveal what Midoriya told him in confidence, but he hinted that the young man probably wasn't done with pro-herodom. Best guess I can reach was that there was someone Midoriya wanted to protect. Who? Midnight questioned, frowning. Someone from 1A. Mike shot back angrily, does it matter? He still came back swinging. Now he's the one they'll paint a target on. And Stain's so-called allies will want vengeance, said Snipe. The League will come for him now if they weren't already. When Nezu gestured, the lights went down. Which is why it's time we're all on the same page. Toshinori, Mirai, and I have kept this quiet for months. Many believed the League's leader is Tamura Shigaraki, a misguided and reckless youth. We no longer believe that's true. The real leader is the man who gave me my wound. The urban legend himself. All for one. Toshinori sighed. A few educators let out a gasp. He's real, mumbled Power Loader. Very, Nezu said in a chilly tone. And still alive despite what most think. He's been around since the dawn of Quirks, manipulating from the shadows. Shigaraki is his pawn. And if he's after Heat Esper, Toshinori's voice began to falter. Then the boy who saved many already might not survive. The Quirk is the only reason he's still alive after what young Bakugo did to him. Losing it may be fatal. And if All for One gets his hands on it, Nezu continued, his eyes sparkling in the light from the screen, Hero Society won't fall. It will burn. After that, nobody said anything. As though echoing the silent fear in the room, the storm outside erupted in thunder. Nito Monoma should be positively ecstatic about Class 1A's bad luck. While Class 1B passed without any problems, their entire class had to attend makeup classes after failing to obtain provisional hero licenses on their first attempt. This should have been a feast of schadenfreude, a mountain of insults ready to fall on their heads for someone who had made his entire identity around making fun of his rivals across the hall. Nevertheless, Monoma remained silent as word got out among the dorms. No smirk at all, not a jab. Every time Class 1A passed by, he just turned his head away, as if they had become invisible. Even Vlad King had stopped to observe his pupil's peculiar actions, frowning. Though few dared to speak, the rest of 1B also noticed. They had, after all, become accustomed to Monoma's constant crossfire. They had secretly relished the quiet for months. It was simpler to enjoy peace than to wonder why it existed. However, the uneasiness persisted. The fact that Monoma had changed since the midterm final exams was undeniable. He had fought Izuku Midoriya head-on back then, and something about that encounter had unnerved him. Perhaps they were all too relieved that he had finally stopped talking to inquire why. The silence grew thicker at lunch. With his tray in hand, Monoma navigated the busy cafeteria. 6 members of Class 1A were seated at the table he passed. Hiroshima was the first to look up. Due to Bakugo's arrest and the events that followed, his eyes had lost their natural gleam. He stiffened, prepared to jump to 1A's support if Monoma made even the slightest insult. However, it never materialized. Monoma didn't even look in their direction. No arrogant smile, no sneer. Only slow, steady steps in the direction of his own table. Hiroshima gave a blink. Uraraka furrowed his brows. Yaoyorozu looked around as if he was anticipating a joke. No one showed up. Maybe for the first time since the sports festival, 1A was taken aback by Monoma's kindness rather than his taunts. Or perhaps his indifference. A few of his classmates slid into Monoma's booth. The mood changed once more before anyone dared to inquire what was wrong with him. When Midoriya arrived, the din in the lunchroom died down like a record being cut. Before, the boy's presence had always been subdued, almost pathetic, but now, months later, it had changed completely. Although there was an implied danger in his new look, his behavior was what made people fearful. He had retaliated. He was a murderer. Nor had he been punished. Like shadows, the whispers followed him. A classmate was arrested by him. He was able to fire a teacher. A villain was killed by him. Despite himself, Monoma's eyes followed him. His mind strayed to their altercation during the final exams, when he had imitated Midoriya's quirk. Esper heat. His veins had been filled with an unnatural heat and force from the raw power, which had been overwhelming. Months later, the phantom feeling was still present. A quirk that seemed more like an unstable star jammed into a frail human body than an ability. A force out of place in this world. A sour smile tugged at Monoma's lips as he glanced down at his unfinished lunch. His voice was low enough to be drowned out by the din of the cafeteria as he whispered to no one in particular. Powerless Deku was a hero. Powerful Deku is a villain. What a world we live in. His classmates didn't respond. They were all at a loss for words. Furthermore, Monoma's remarks weren't intended to be mocking for the first time. They were a truth, a silent, frightened observation. For the first time, Midoriya felt the stares like knives against his skin, but he chose to ignore them. He didn't feel proud. Killer wasn't something he wanted on his record. All he wanted was to eat his katsudon by himself, in a booth by himself where no one else was allowed to sit. Rewind. Despite the rumors portraying him as untouchable, Izuku Midoriya was not spared punishment, particularly for engaging in vigilantism. Pro-heroes are formally subject to rules, which are intended to uphold public confidence. Izuku, too, he was merely a citizen who committed murder outside the law. He was no longer even a hero in training. Stain was indeed a murderer. Yes, the commission privately breathed a sigh of relief that the hero killer had finally been removed from the board, and some of his victims' families did write letters of appreciation. However, Midoriya was not exonerated by gratitude. They saw him as more dangerous, if anything. The boy was now a problem they could use, a tool they could control. Izuku sat with his hands folded on a table in a quiet police precinct, under harsh fluorescent lights, 3 days after what the media dubbed the Takoba hero rejection incident. There was a slight metal and recycled air odor in the air. The man on the other side of him was Detective Naomasa Tsukauchi, a veteran with the remarkable ability to spot lies. Few people worldwide were aware of his quirk. Even fewer were aware of how uncomfortable it was to be seated across from him. Izuku, to his credit, was helpful right away. He didn't act like a martyr or drag things out. He gave a straightforward response when asked why he went back to the stadium that day. The chaos, fearful heroes, trapped students, and villains trying to gain an advantage, had been captured by his thermal vision. He couldn't watch them die, even though he now detested the organization that had rejected him. With his quirk humming silently in the back of his mind, Naomasa listened intently. The truth. All of the statements were accurate. The detective's questions then became more pointed. With gentleness, Naomasa inquired, "What about Tenya Iida?" A lot of your former classmates think you didn't care that he died. Some think you were happy about it. Izuku did not recoil. His awakening had hardened his green eyes, but they remained steady. His words, "I don't mourn for anyone who wronged me," came out straight. Iida didn't hurt me as much as Bakugo or Aizawa did, but he earned my scorn nonetheless. I didn't want him dead. However, his idiotic demise benefited me because it was further evidence I needed to run Eraserhead out of UA. Brutal truthfulness. Naomasa, a man accustomed to darkness, shifted uneasily in his chair because it was so sharp. He was now aware of Midoriya's past. All Might once saved a wide-eyed boy, but years of abuse, institutional neglect, and betrayals had transformed him into someone else entirely. All of this was understandable. His disobedience, his disdain, even his rage at All Might. It's tragic, but it makes sense. Still, Naomasa felt it amid the volcanic fury. In Izuku's words was the smallest hint of a lie. He didn't call it out because it was so tiny and tragically human. A lie that is motivated by desire rather than malice. For peace and quiet. In order to connect. For affection. Izuku still aches for those things in some way. Naomasa cautioned him that another person wanted to talk to him before the interrogation ended. Izuku was not taken aback. Thank you, and a pat on the back were never going to be the end of this. The door opened. 3 men came in, 2 of them wearing sunglasses and suits, looking like clichés from a bad spy film. The third was not like the others. A lanky middle-aged man with disheveled, chin-length beige hair, with the gentle bruises of sleepless nights framing his weary eyes. Although he didn't appear dangerous, Izuku was aware of this. The man smiled thinly and bureaucratically as he introduced himself. The man said, "Izuku Midoriya, first." He spoke in a quiet, purposeful tone. "My name is Yokumiru Mera. I work with the Hero Public Safety Commission. I'm not here to interrogate you any further. Detective Tsukauchi's report covered the facts. I'm here to discuss what happens next." Izuku took a moment to respond. The warm auras of the men around him cast a faint tint on the world, and his quirk hummed in the back of his mind. Tsukauchi had been dependable and truthful. The 2 bodyguards were procedurally empty vessels. Mera's was torn. An air of earnestness weighed down by a prepared speech. Izuku said, "I'm listening," calmly. Mera folded his hands on the table and nodded. "What you did 3 days ago has created complications. Stain's death is, technically, manslaughter. You're not a licensed hero. Vigilantism, lethal force, charges the law cannot ignore. And yet," his tone softened as he leaned forward a little, "you saved lives. Students, pro-heroes, civilians. Even those who don't like you can't deny that. The families of Stain's victims are relieved. Some even call you a hero." "I wouldn't use that word to describe myself," he thought. Mera went on, "But public opinion is volatile," she said. "People fear what they don't understand. And your quirk, your capabilities, they frighten people. A single citizen took down the hero killer. Some see that as inspiring. Others, as dangerous." The weight of that hung in the air as he paused. Izuku sensed the earnestness of his remarks, the slender thread of real concern, but there was another current flowing beneath it. The Commission's current. The truth is colder. Mera's tone became more realistic as she said, "So here's the reality. The Commission has discretion. We can ensure you face no charges. No prison. No drawn-out trial. We can help manage the public narrative, make sure you're seen for your intentions, not just your threat level." Izuku whispered, "And the price?" Mera did not recoil. "Cooperation. Oversight. You'd agree to work under our guidance. Training, evaluations, and assignments, when called upon. Nothing unreasonable. It's an opportunity, not a punishment." Izuku sensed the lie woven throughout the smooth, almost gentle, words. Possibility. They're referring to a leash. Supervision. Control is what they mean. But it wasn't cruelty. His quirk read the subtle dissonance in Mera's heart. "I'm sorry. This situation is identical to that of Lady Nagant and Hawks, despite the fact that he is a legal adult." Mera wished he hadn't been the one to take advantage of someone who had so much potential to be the Commission's hitman. However, it's possible that Samui picked him because he can make the offer seem so genuine that Midoriya will be more persuaded. "Despite what I did, I swore off doing anything heroic," Izuku reminded the man. "We are aware of your disillusionment. Sadly, you put yourself in a tough spot that cannot be swept under the rug," Mera saddened. "The world isn't kind to people like you. Either you work with us, with some control over how you're perceived, or others will decide for you. and they won't be patient. Or merciful. It was there. Not dangerous. Not directly. Izuku, however, was aware of the meaning nonetheless. If you don't accept the leash, we'll ruin you. What's the worst? Mera wasn't taking pride. He detested every word, and Izuku sensed it. Izuku sat unmoving for a long time. The silence was filled with the hum of the light. All Might, Island, and everything that had led him here came to mind. His parents wanted him safe, he thought. Uraraka, the lone bright light he had once desperately clung to, came to mind. He realized that he couldn't defeat the Commission in a war today. Perhaps one day, not right now, though. He breathed out slowly. So, I accept, or you crush me. Mera gave a nearly pleading shake of his head. I'm asking you to let us help you. We don't want another tragedy. Our country has had enough already. One more tragedy. Izuku nearly burst out laughing. The selection of words was extremely deliberate. So well groomed. They thought they were giving him a present. His smile was sharp and faint. Fine, he said, I'll play along. For now. Like a man relieved that a storm was over, Mera closed his eyes for a moment. Thank you. You won't regret this. I already do. Izuku thought bitterly, and I have to accelerate part of my plans because of this crap. Once more, Uraraka, you play with my emotions and abandon me. He didn't say it, though. Because this was survival for the time being. Playing along was necessary for survival, until the day he broke their leash. Flashback end. For Japan, the situation could not have been more chaotic. Not even the man who took pride in never missing a future, Mirai Sasaki, had anticipated this storm. His protection and solace had always come from his foresight. However, it hadn't equipped him for this. His calculations had never taken into account a league of villains, far greater danger. He made a mistake. All Might had asked that All for One be buried or otherwise removed from play, and he had held on to the statistical probability that All for One was dead for good, buried beneath Tartarus. It was the logical thing to do in a sensible world. Nevertheless, he had refused to acknowledge that the Demon King was still alive and, worse, still in control. There were 4 more dead pro-heroes. Not obscure names, but independent pillars. Like an earthquake, their loss rocked the already precarious hero society, shattering confidence, spirits, and any sense of security. Additionally, many hero students who were still in shock from the attack had been deprived of the opportunity to obtain their provisional hero licenses. All for One was letting loose a level of chaos that neither Mirai nor even All Might had witnessed before. Was it carelessness? Is the villain's advanced age beginning to give way to senility? Or worse, was this a premeditated show, a deliberate spotlight to signal something bigger? The possibilities caused Mirai's stomach to turn. In the background, there was another issue that, for various reasons, made him furious. Whether or not it was warranted, Stain's murder had provided the Hero Public Safety Commission with the justification they needed to impose their will on Izuku Midoriya much earlier than they had intended. There was a hollow kind of victory there, as much as Mirai hated to admit it. That boy was dangerous, too strong, too erratic, and too sensitive to be completely trusted. Nevertheless, there was a lingering bitterness from the way the Commission had dug its claws into him. Even though you got what you wanted, it was a Pyrrhic victory, the kind that makes you feel ill. Since the public's faith in heroes was in shambles and half of the country's police force was focused exclusively on tracking the League, Mirai had shifted his focus, because someone had to. There were other monsters lurking in the shadows besides the League. Hasaikai Shi. The remaining Yakuza members were waking up, becoming more assertive, and rapidly growing their trigger operations. No one was discussing the other storm, though. The harm would be irreversible if they formed an alliance with the League. This scenario kept Mirai up at night because he had seen enough of the future to know what the worst-case scenario looked like. So far, he had gathered damning but insufficient evidence. His hands were bound by legal procedure. They were unable to simply storm the Hasaikai compound. A warrant was required, a compelling enough argument to succeed in court. Thus, he methodically worked with Yukyu's agencies and Fat Gum, gathering all the intelligence he could until it was complete. He had sent to got out today for that reason, not only to conduct an investigation but also to allow the boy to get some fresh air. That morning, Mirio had entered the agency with a weight that Mirai hardly ever saw in him. There was now a silent burden on the boy who smiled through storms and laughed at suffering. When Dobby's blue fire ate Mr. Brave alive in Takoba National Stadium, he had been there, just a few feet away. He had not been saved by Mirio. Not a single student had. Grief didn't respond to logic, even though every logical part of Mirai knew there was nothing Mirio could have done. But it still gnawed at him. Mirai was not upset with his protege for being weak. Could he? Whether they were visible or not, all of the students who had survived that day had scars. They had all been duped by All for One. What's the worst? Not even anyone knew why. According to the League, they had come to save Stain. However, that was illogical. No hostages had been held by Stain. The disciples of All for One weren't snatching him as he was being paraded around at some hero-run event. He hadn't even been in the hero's grasp. Why, then? With his mind racing, Mirai drummed his fingers on the desk. What was in store for that serpent? Then a grotesque thought crept into his mind. Unless... No, that isn't possible. It made a horrible sort of sense, though, the more he turned it over. Was Stain himself taken by All for One and taken to the stadium, knowing that the heroes would react and that the fight would be lethal? If so, why later save him? What was the game being played? The last component then came together, and Mirai felt the chill seep into his bones. Naturally, all of the new members of the League, including Spinner, Dobby, and Toga, were followers of Stain. They viewed him as a martyr and accepted his twisted ideology. There was no possibility that Stain would ever form an alliance with real villains if he was, as some had claimed, a zealot of All Might's image, a man who only wanted worthy heroes to prosper and the false ones to fail. In a single action, All for One had taken advantage of the beliefs of the Commission, the heroes, and the Stain's fanatics. They all danced to his music. Mirai's mouth clenched. He muttered resentfully under his breath, All for One, you snake, with grudging admiration in every word. Always finding ways to tarnish All Might's name, even using those who already tainted it. On his desk, his hands clenched into fists. What else have you concocted to cause my hero more pain? Tagata returned from his patrol about an hour later, looking even more agitated than before. Sir, I think that I ran into Kai Chisaki. What happened? Mirai inquired urgently, seeking as much information as she could. Tagata continued by describing how a young girl in a hospital gown had run into him, only for Chisaki, also known as Overhaul, the Shihasaikai leader, to appear and declare that the terrified youngster, whom he named Eri, was his daughter. Eri had obeyed orders to return to Chisaki, but Tagata doubted the truth of this assertion. Tagata pretended to be an air-headed hero student sent on a random patrol in an effort to start a conversation. Lost in thought, Tagata explained, the way that she was looking at me, it was like she was scared about what might happen to us, both her and me. In Mirai's words, just as well, Overhaul likely knew who you were, but it was good that you hid the fact that you were on the lookout for him and the other Shihasaikai. It could have led to him catching on to our investigation and made things more difficult. At least we know that we are in the right area. Tagata appeared dejected despite Mirai's admiration. Mirai questioned, is something wrong? Tagata said to himself, that little girl, Eri, she was hurt, I think Overhaul may have been hurting her, and I just let her go back to him. I have all this power, and I just let her go. Mirai gave Tagata a shoulder pat. You did the right thing. We don't have enough information to legally confront Chisaki as is. Tagata nodded and dismissed himself, but his words did not appear to inspire him in the least. The night air was heavy with the smell of sizzling street food, and the Isaha market was still bustling beneath the neon signs. With a bag of skewers in one hand and a roasted chestnut in the other, Fatgum walked through the crowded stalls with a smile on his face. The locals were accustomed to Fatgum's massive frame stumbling between stands. Even in the absence of trouble, his presence was comforting due to his reputation in Kansai. He said, there are a lot of idiots making noise these days, in between mouthfuls of fried octopus balls. Sometimes feels like I can't eat enough to keep up with all the calories I burn chasing after 'em. Ain't right. Sure would have been nice if we had someone else for work studies to help punch the problems away. Tamaki Amajiki stooped to walk a few paces behind, his hood drawn low. You mean I'm not good enough, right? That you wanted someone better at close combat than me. Mid-chew, Fatgum paused and blinked. I wasn't sayin' that at all. You're twistin' my words again, Sunniator. Tamaki felt pain in her ears. He gazed at his footwear. Why else would you complain? There are plenty of people who'd be a better pick. I only made it into the big three because Mirio and Najire dragged me along. Someone else deserved it more. Fatgum laughed and used a napkin to wipe his hands. You crack me up, kid. But I'm dead serious. Your friends see something you can't. You've got more potential than you give yourself credit for. Big Three ain't no fluke. Mumbling, I know they mean well, Tamaki said. But being around there, relentless optimism feels like being squashed between two suns. Especially Mirio, he's so bright it hurts. Amused, Fatgum arched an eyebrow. Is that why you call yourself Sunniator? You wanna gobble up all that sunlight for yourself? Tamaki's cheeks flushed. Please don't, take it out of context. Shoppers in the vicinity glanced at Fatgum as he laughed loudly. Relax, buddy, just means you're lucky. Not everyone's got friends who'll drag him into the light. Their patrol remained silent as they wandered on. Fatgum's frequent food stops were the only disruptions during the incident-free 30 minutes. The bigger hero finally sighed happily. No trouble tonight. Guess we can call it a win. Let's head back. However, as he glanced at Tamaki's hunched shoulders, his tone softened. You still thinkin' about the license exam? After hesitating, Tamaki nodded. I watched him die. Fourth kind, Shigaraki, he touched him and he was just gone. I've seen injuries before, even blood, but never that. If Midoriya hadn't, that lightning bolt, his tone cracked. I fought like I never had before against those horrible Nomu, especially the one with chainsaws, but it wasn't enough. None of it was in that moment. Fatgum touched his pupil's shoulder with a huge hand. None of that's on you. The League, they live to hurt people. Ain't your fault. Fourth kind was a tough guy who believed in looking out for the little guy. He wouldn't want you drowning yourself in guilt. With a heavy swallow, Tamaki muttered, the redhead, his last intern. He looked so lost, like part of him died too. Fatgum's gaze grew softer. That's grief, kid. Only thing to do is honor him by keeping on. The silent conversation lingered in the darkness, almost lovingly. Then suddenly the air was different. The temperature dropped so quickly that Fatgum's breath was hazy. Conversations faltered. Shoppers looked around nervously as the market's hum subsided to silence. Tamaki stopped. Kansai's night had lost its warmth, as though it had been sucked dry by an invisible predator. His intuition cried out. Food forgotten. Fatgum straightened. That ain't natural. Isaha Market erupted in chaos like a thunderclap as something impending arrived. As the ragged villains rushed out of a narrow alley, trampling over fruit stalls and overturned carts, the crowd dispersed in all directions. Their untamed eyes were prey escaping a predator, not the rebellious glare of small-time criminals. He froze Suo, exclaimed one, gripping his arms as if they were still scalding from frostbite. Another cried, every man for himself. They hardly got 2 steps before colliding head-on with Fatgum's enormous body, a wall of living flesh. As he was saying, whoa there, fellas, the BMI hero stuffed 2 takoyaki balls into his mouth. Why don't you take a breather before you hurt someone? He swept them casually into his folds, his body shifting like a gelatinous trap. One man, however, who was wiry and flexible, slipped between Fatgum's legs and thinned his body to the width of a razor. Tamaki yelled, not so fast. As his fingers grew into slippery octopus tentacles that swung forward. The villain was yanked off his feet when the ropey limbs wrapped around his torso in mid-stride. You. Gross. Howled the villain. What kind of freak sprouts calamari fingers? Tamaki felt nauseous. His own confidence withered at the derision, and he flinched as if burned. He mumbled, I didn't. I'm sorry, despite his grip automatically becoming tighter. Fatgum leaned over the apprehended gangsters, ignoring the jab. Now, what's got you lot running like mice? Spill. One of them screamed, let us go. With a broken voice, he'll freeze us, too. He's right behind us. Fatgum blinked. Freeze you. What? You punks tick off some wannabe popsicle with an ice quirk. A sharp, hissing beam of blue-white light split the night before he could receive a verbal response. The blast left behind jagged crystal frost where it passed through the street. Fatgum and the villains were suddenly flash-frozen in mid-motion within a glassy ice sarcophagus. Tamaki exclaimed, Fatgum, but his voice trailed off as he sensed the temperature dropping even more. The market was filled with a white mist, and the cold air made his lungs burn. The sound of ice crackling sharply as it moved across the cobblestones reached his ears. His chest fought between instinct and fear, but then something inside of him woke up. The warrior Sunniator took the place of the timid Tamaki. I am unable to run. Not when Fatgum is imprisoned. Not here with civilians. A strip of dried seaweed, which Fatgum had given him as a snack earlier, was tucked in his jacket pocket and he bit down hard on it. His skin immediately darkened into a rubbery, waxy sheen, his arms and torso developed the same heat-retaining layer that kelp and other marine life use to withstand freezing currents. Insufficient. He required more. Tamaki reached into his pouch and shoved dried peppers and raw ginger candy, foods he carried to help him deal with upset stomachs, into his mouth. Manifest ignited once more. A radiant internal heat, akin to a thermal battery, filled his body as his capillaries widened and his blood warmed. Heat Haze Carapace, a combination of heat-boosting metabolism derived from ginger and chili and insulating kelp layers, is his new super move. It might buy him seconds rather than milliseconds, but it wouldn't protect him from the icy mist. His kraken shape burst into existence. From his back, enormous octopus tentacles spread out, slashing outward in all directions. He threw as many civilians away from the encroaching frost as he could. He vaulted himself and the rescued into an alley past the edge of the mist, his shell-coated arms slamming into the pavement like icebreakers. He yelled, "Run! Don't look back!" Instead, Tamaki turned back toward the creeping whiteout once they were safe. Fatgum's hand was frozen mid-reach, his silhouette trapped halfway inside the crystalline mass. Steeling himself, Tamaki dove back in. The closer he came, the thicker the mist, and even through the heat haze of the kelp ginger, the cold bit his bones. Immediately his breath crystallized. A figure appeared through the frost, a man standing at the epicenter with a halo of freezing fog around his body. The hazy outline of a left arm raising was just barely visible to Tamaki. A blue-white death beam stabbed at him. Tamaki dove, deflecting the blast's edge with a shield-like manifestation of a chitinous shell. Even grazing contact left a line of numbing agony on his side, and he felt it scorch past him. Avoid pushing yourself too far, he reminded himself. Remain mobile, remain hidden. His hands slammed to the floor. Octopus mirage. The pigments in his skin shifted and rippled. His body bled into the frost-covered landscape until he was invisible, like an octopus blending into coral. The ice villain hesitated, looking around in the fog, not knowing where his victim had disappeared to. Slowly, Tamaki slithered closer. The strategy was straightforward. Hit quickly, disable, and release Fatgum. He stabbed forward, lunging, and conjured up two thick scorpion tails from his hips. An elephant could be stunned by the injected venom that glistened on the serrated tips. Not even the ice villain batted an eye. He used his bare hands to grasp the barbed stingers. And ripped them out. Tamaki's body exploded with white-hot pain. As though actual limbs had been torn from him, the pain was primordial. His camouflage died and flickered. He stumbled, vulnerable. In the blink of an eye, the icy silhouette appeared, cutting the distance. A glacier-sized fist struck Tamaki's jaw. Before he hit the icy pavement, his entire world turned white and then black. The fog froze. The Isaha market was buried in half-frozen ruin as the abnormal cold subsided. The walking blizzard, the antagonist, vanished into thin air. There was a bitter mist hanging low, hissing against neon lights, and vending stalls were half overturned under jagged rime. There was only the faint crackle of ice spreading along broken glass where there had once been laughter and haggling. Grim proof of what had just transpired was a pro-hero wrapped like a statue and a bright future hero sprawled unconscious. A gaunt man was half hidden behind an overflowing trash can in the corner of a small alley. He was identified by his gang colors as one of the thugs who had been frozen with Fatgum's prisoners, but he had miraculously, or cursedly, escaped the ice unharmed. His breath puffed like white smoke as it caught in the chilly air. His heart ached with fear. He ought to have run with the others. Every instinct in the body cried out to run. But he remained and watched, his knees locked. The frozen men he saw, his friends, co-workers, arranged as if they were hideous statues. It wasn't the heat that made his teeth chatter. He felt regret clawing at him. Trembling, he fumbled for something, a cigarette, in his coat. A weapon, hope, when a voice broke the haze. It said, "You look remorseful," simultaneously cool and collected. Worried, too, but not for the heroes I just dealt with. It was a voice from behind. The criminal let out a scream and instinctively spun around, unleashing his quirk. Tiny blades protruded from his arms as he slashed wildly at the source. Not even flesh was scraped by the blades. They froze in the middle of the swing, glittering for a heartbeat before breaking like glass made of sugar. He tripped, staggered back, clambered to his feet, and fled. He was followed by the cold. After 3 minutes of blind panic, with his lungs burning, he crashed into a wall of ice and brick that was a dead end. Like a trap, the alley yawned. His pursuer had never been far behind him when he turned, gasping. In the fog, a silhouette. Not a face, not a feature, simply being there. The Iceman's voice floated through the mists, casual as a teacher correcting a pupil. Pro tip, he said. If you want to make a living as a criminal, learn the city. Know every alley, every fire escape. The advantage of the turf keeps you breathing a little longer. The thug's hands closed on steel after frantically fumbling in his coat. Pulling out a pistol, he fired. Deafeningly, the report reverberated in the alleyway. In midair, the bullet slowed. It was the bitter cyclone of cold that whirled around the Iceman like an invisible cloak, not impact. The air itself blossomed with frost. He leisurely plucked the slug between two fingers when it drifted close enough. With its red shell and hypodermic tips, it wasn't even a slug. A cartridge for a trigger. The Iceman said, "There we go," flipping it over like a jeweler examining a gem. His invisible eyes returned to the thug and he said, "I knew my lead wasn't wrong. Tell me who gave this to you, and you can walk away." Quiet night, no harm. He was not believed by the gaunt man. Fear triumphed over logic. He stabbed himself in the neck with a loaded syringe and screamed ferociously. Like wildfire, trigger struck. His pupils contracted, his veins glowed. A shriek of tearing metal filled the alley as the blades that were emerging from his body multiplied tenfold and grew into a storm of steel. For a moment, he believed he was unbeatable. He was told so by the drug. Now he could murder a superhero. He might murder the Iceman. In an instant, the illusion was destroyed. Each blade flashed into a halt. Each edge broke into ice dust. He fell victim to the cold more quickly than anticipated. He was on the ground when his vision cleared. A boot was placed on his chest as the silhouette loomed overhead. He had not even noticed his movements. The Iceman lowered his voice and squatted down a little. It wasn't noisy. It was not necessary. He said, "Here's another pro tip," with a hint of malice in every word. No matter how far humans evolve, we're still animals. Wretched apes playing at kings. Therefore, we are all bound by the rules of nature. The thug let out a whine. Above him, the presence seemed predatory and ancient, more like a natural force than a man. Rule 1, proceeded the Iceman. His voice carried the finality of scripture: the weak die. The strong survive. Rule 2, if you don't want Rule 1 to apply, you obey the strong. Like a loyal pet. A moment's silence. A chill. And I'm not one for pets who don't listen to their masters. The chill grew stronger. As the frost slid down his legs, the thug let out a shriek. After screaming, his nerves thankfully went numb. His legs were covered in crystallized blue-white ice when he looked. He was no longer able to sense them. The Iceman stated clinically detached, "You'd better start talking faster than light because if they're not amputated soon, the cold will spread. So, let's try this again. Who gave you the Quirk-destroying drug?" Tamaki stirred. Heavy with fatigue, his eyelids fluttered open, but his vision was stung by the hospital light's sterile glare. His body felt heavy, as if ice still held on to his veins, and he was immobile for a moment. He felt a chill that was alien and intrusive, as if frost had settled in his bones. His voice was weak and dry, and his lips parted. "How long was I out?" The two figures at his bedside heard the words immediately, though they were hardly audible. Tamaki, Najire and Mirio exclaimed simultaneously, their voices combining alarm and relief. Neither of them dared to startle him anymore, but they leaned forward. The intensity was still there, but their tones grew softer. 3 days, Mirio said at last, his typically vivacious energy tempered by anxiety. "You've been under for 3 days. The doctors had to stabilize your temperature first. You and Fatgum were both close to severe hypothermia and frostbite." Tamaki blinked, slowly assembling the words in his mind. The memory of the frozen market, the screams, the ice that sliced through him before he could react made his breath catch. His skin was faintly mottled with the pale scars of frost, and he looked down at his arms, which were bound with wires and IVs. He said, his voice cracking a little, "Fatgum." "Alive," Najire blurted out, a tiny smile attempting to break through her anxiety. The doctors said his body's lipids helped keep him insulated long enough for help to arrive. "He's recovering in another wing." Tamaki's eyes briefly brightened with relief, but it didn't make the burden on his chest any lighter. "And the criminals?" Najire's face darkened. Instead, Mirio accepted the question. "They survived, thanks to Fatgum's body heat. They're in worse shape than you were, but stable enough to talk eventually. Once they're strong enough, the police will want answers about who that ice user was." Tamaki's throat grew constricted. He forced himself to ask the next question, but his voice faltered. My parents. Najire said, they've barely left your side, with warmth. But it's the weekend, and they had to work this morning. We didn't want you waking up alone, so, here we are. The familiar shame rose as Tamaki turned his face slightly away. He detested being the center of attention and detested needing to be reassured. He was thankful they were there, though, for once. The door opened with a creak. There was a tiny shadow in the room, Dean Nezu and 2 detectives. His keen eyes moved clinically around the room before focusing on the weaker pupil. Mr. Amajiki, Nezu courteously replied, I'm glad to see you awake. But I'm afraid we need your account of what happened at Isaha Market. Invoking the shards of memory, Tamaki closed his eyes for a moment. He spoke clearly despite his trembling voice. Fatgum and I were on patrol. We noticed some thugs fleeing, terrified. Then, him, the ice user. He froze Fatgum instantly. I tried to keep civilians safe. Tried to fight, but his hand trembled against the sheets. I was useless. He knocked me out in one blow. Nezu continued despite Mirio and Najire's glances at the self-condemnation in his voice. Your testimony matches what we've gathered. He demonstrated not only mastery of ice but also physical strength beyond expectation, considering how sturdy you've always been. A dangerous combination. A detective stepped forward, his voice grim and low. There's more. 6 blocks from the market, we found a corpse. Male, affiliated with the thugs you chased. The cause of death was hypothermia, frostbite beginning at the legs. He was also dosed heavily on trigger. Meaning our suspect isn't just reckless. He's a killer. A strained silence descended upon the room. The machines that were keeping an eye on Tamaki's health even seemed to be humming louder. This doesn't align with the League's patterns, Nezu thought. Too chaotic, too opportunistic, but the implications are clear. We have another threat. One who doesn't fear heroes. Tamaki looked up at the ceiling. As realization set in, the chill in his veins seemed to return. The League of Villains, the animal abuser, and now this Iceman. The world seemed to be disintegrating, fragment by fragment, and he had been helpless to halt it. I should have done more, he silently said. Mirio firmly said, no, his voice cutting through the dense atmosphere. Leaning forward, he firmly grasped Tamaki's shoulder with the conviction of a brother. You did everything you could. You're still here. That's enough. We'll face this together. Tamaki closed her eyes once more, but not out of weakness. The purpose was to conceal the pain of tears. In Japan's already tense atmosphere, the most recent headline hit like a hammer. BMI hero Fatgum hospitalized by unknown villain. News spreads quickly. A friendly, approachable pro-hero who never pursued fame or made it into the Billboard Top 10, Fatgum had long been a favorite of the public. He constantly proved himself when it mattered most. He was the epitome of the everyday hero to the average citizen, trustworthy, kind, and unavoidable. It was unimaginable that someone like that could be brought down. Nevertheless, it did occur. To a public obsessed with appearances, it didn't really matter that Fatgum was still alive and loudly nagging his doctors to let him go. Japan appeared to veer closer to panic with every blow to its heroes. After Isaha Market, the enigmatic ice villain disappeared, but Endeavor personally led the manhunt, which continued unabated. The pursuit by the flame hero seemed appropriate, even poetic. Who better than the man whose fire could level buildings to melt a monster of ice? Irony, however, had teeth. Questions that no one had previously dared to ask out loud soon crept into the public conversation. Why didn't Endeavor's son use his father's flames if he too possessed an ice quirk? Conspiracy theorists now associate Shoto Todoroki's outspoken rejection of his father with something more sinister. Was his defiance of fire a sign of immaturity or a sign of something more serious? Suspicion grew as each news clip depicted Shoto brandishing only ice. Then the elephant in the room appeared. The appearances of All Might had become dreadfully infrequent. Since the Island incident several months prior, the symbol of peace had not been cited in public. Some were placated by Ua and the Hero Commission's well-prepared statement about his new focus on teaching the next generation. Others only felt more uneasy as a result. Why would the number one hero completely stop going on public patrol? Never one to miss a chance, the League of Villains stoked the fires with carefully crafted rumors. All Might is hurt. All Might is going to retire. The heroic era is coming to an end. And they paid attention. In an attempt to learn more, some reporters focused on the UA students. However, access was challenging due to the recently established dormitory system, and even when a few students from various departments were cornered in town, their responses were incredibly ambiguous. All Might never appeared outside of the classroom and only instructed one foundational heroics course. Not once. That was strange, even suspicious. The students at UA were aware of this growing discomfort. They also sensed it. With a clipboard in her arm, Bubble Girl stood in the front of 1A's classroom. The students were curious about the purpose of this unexpected meeting and were buzzing faintly. The room went quiet as she cleared her throat. Okay, she said unwaveringly. 2 items. Kaminari attempted a smile but failed. Please tell me number 1 is licenses. The provisional license course is approved. It starts in 7 days. And you'll be supervised by Gang Orca. A collective sigh. Shoulders relaxed. Bubble Girl's fingers gripped the board more tightly. Item 2 is Midoriya. Instantaneous and fragile silence. In her lap, Ochako's hands clenched. Hiroshima gazed at his desk's grain as if it held answers. Hagakuri's chair creaked. Her discomfort was evident even from a distance. You all know what happened at Takoba, Bubble Girl went on. The league crashed the exam. 4 pros died. Stain engaged. Midoriya intervened to help us, and in the clash, Stain died. The voice of Yaoyorozu was hardly audible. None of us were there when it happened, but one of the villains, Spinner, was very vocal and hysterical when calling Midoriya a murderer. Jiro said, hypocritical prick, puzzled. Right, Bubble Girl said with a nod. The public story is, hero students assisted. That's generous. The legal reality is uglier. Even in self-defense, killing has consequences. The commission offered Midoriya a deal. He works under them, directly, with oversight and conditions. In exchange, he's pardoned. He accepted. He'll rejoin the hero course under those terms. Ciro's tape fluttered uneasily from his sleeve as he said, so he is coming back. Here. With us. Under supervision, stated Bubble Girl. Restricted deployments. No independent patrols. Training will be structured. Kaminari took a swallow. Eyes moved to the vacant space where Hagakuri sat and asked, and the, going nuclear, thing. She winced. Bubble Girl remained motionless. Medical specifics are confidential. What I can say. Risk protocols are in place. Power management is daily. Midoriya has complied. Complied, mumbled Jiro, like he had a choice. He didn't, Mineta stated with unexpected firmness. He looked at the floor and then up, saying, none of us did that day. The League brought a war to our doorstep. He kept people alive. Also, I'm here because of him. Say what you want, but he didn't have to stick his neck out for any of us. He still did. Hiroshima gave a single laugh. Not a joke. The words hit home. Yeah. He also blew up Bakugo's future. 10 years because of the stupid shit he did when he was a brat. Fine. But don't act like we're supposed to clap. Yaoyorozu whispered, Hiroshima, Bakugo tried to murder a classmate on live TV. Hiroshima's jaw tightened as she said, I know what he did. He shook his head and said, I know. I'm not blind. I'm mad that all of this is real. That Iida's gone. That we didn't save him. That we let things get this bad. The room shattered at the name. Every perspective of the past was distorted around Iida, who lingered like a broken lens. The Takoba National Stadium came back into Ochako's mind. Ochako and the rest of 1A attempted to flee when Stain appeared out of nowhere and chaos ensued, followed by the League's invasion. However, because the commission had decided to have so many students compete in one place, there were too many students to evacuate, and by the time it was 1A's turn to leave, the Nomu Leaguers blocked all exits. Their only options were to join the battle or go into hiding. Ochako was one of the people who attempted to hide, but Muscular ended up pursuing him. Gang Orca intervened and attempted to shield her, but the murderous villain was too strong for him. Both of them ought to have perished, but Muscular was overpowered by Midoriya. It resembled something from a fairy tale or a dream. Ochako was among the first to escape, and the only explanation he could come up with for why he returned was that, Deku broke his word and came back for me. Despite everything, does he still have feelings for me? Quote. Soon after, she discovered her voice. Red-faced but steady eyes said, I want to say something. I wasn't brave. When it mattered, I let people talk me into looking away. From Midoriya, from Iida, from what Bakugo was, I can't fix it, but when he comes back, I'm going to apologize, properly. Tokiyami continued to look straight ahead. All of us failed Midoriya before he ever awakened. That doesn't vanish because we're uncomfortable now. My words weren't supposed to make him feel like he wasn't wanted, Suyu uttered feebly. Siro's own harsh candor unnerved the frog girl, but she was powerless to correct him. No offense, Asui, but while I prefer people who speak what's on their mind all the time, your type generally tends to do more harm than good. Frankly, you were just as bad as Bakugo, Siro said. Not that you're the only one guilty in any way. Hagakure raised his voice arrogantly. Will we be safe with him in the dorms? No one in the 1E dorms has filed a complaint about him giving heat illnesses anymore, and he was already on thin ice with the staff, Shoji said. Bubble Girl remained firm. Your job isn't to feel safe. It's to become professionals who make others safe. Midoriya's presence doesn't change that, your discipline does. There will be curfews, separation protocols, and training rotations. If anyone harasses him or tries to provoke him, you answer to me and the commission. The same goes the other way. What about him? Inquired Jiro. He made it clear he hates us. He holds you in contempt for how you view the quirkless, and he, at heart, still sees himself as one, which makes your lack of camaraderie personal, Bubble Girl stated bluntly. Earn back what you broke. Or don't, but you will function as a class. Plenty of pro heroes don't like each other and have to learn to work professionally at least once. Use the coming discomfort as another form of training. Halfway, Mineta raised a hand. If he needs a partner for drills, I'll take it. Ochako gave a nearly bowing nod. Me too. Kaminari appeared sick. Siro gazed down at his palms. As if sugar could heal a moral wound, Sato whispered something about baking later. Momo straightened her posture and wiped her eyes. Bubble Girl took a look at the time. License course briefing at 1600. Suit diagnostics at 1800. Sleep, eat, train. She stopped at the entrance. And decide who you're going to be the next time the world catches fire. With his elbows resting on his knees and his eyes focused on the briefcase that was neatly placed on top of his bed, Izuku sat slouched in his chair. Through the window of his dorm, the late afternoon light caught on its metal edges. It was the same case that Najire had been carrying around at the stadium on the day that everything began to fall apart more quickly than he could keep up. He had dismissed it at the time as a peculiar Najire occurrence. She was full of surprises, but this one had a reason, one that he had only recently discovered. Nezu had therefore made plans. He had, of course. If the rat wasn't a chess player, he was always thinking 10 moves ahead of the board. Evidently, backup plans were being written behind Izuku's back even after Nezu told him directly that he respected his desire to not be a hero. Izuku had already commissioned a suit for the dirty chimera, as he had begun to refer to him in his more cynical moments. Nezu and the commission wrapped it up in polite language. All dressed up as care, thermoregulation support, safer control of heat esper's output, better sleep hygiene. Izuku, however, was aware that it was insurance. Heat esper's energy may seem limitless, but every night his biology took a toll. Fever flares, restless nights, the atomic bomb risk, as the commission so tactfully phrased it. They feared that he would lose it and bring about another Hiroshima. That sour mantra kept repeating in his mind, without invitation. They didn't want me at my worst, and yet they expect me to come save them now that I'm at my best. What a joke. Izuku's jaw tightened. All right, he would comply if wearing the suit allowed him to maintain control and possibly sleep without using the air conditioner to its fullest capacity every night. However, compliance should never be confused with forgiveness. He got up and picked up the case. It's time to leave. When he had announced his return transfer, Class 1E had been eerily silent. That their walking volcano of a neighbor would be someone else's problem was something he half expected to be relieved, perhaps even joyful. They had every reason to want him gone following the heatstroke scare. But there had been no applause. No sarcastic muttering. There was only a tense, almost guilty silence. It surprised him, but it did not absolve them. None of it was important. He would train with 1A tomorrow. The same folks who used to mock him for not having any quirks. The same people who shuddered at the thought of Heat Esper going nuclear in the future. Friends. Before it was ever constructed, that bridge had burned down. The evening air was warm and heavy against his skin as he cut across campus, leaving Heights Alliance behind. The P.E. The locker rooms were nestled at the edge of the grounds, which towered ahead. He had been instructed to get dressed there before going to ground beta. It was his first trial run, supervised. Always being watched over. After opening the briefcase, Izuku put on the suit that was inside. Even though he didn't want to admit it, putting it on felt good. Safe. In balance. It was like donning armor made especially for a body that was always too hot to contain. Izuku's preference for speed over power made the costume ideal for a leaner version of Endeavor and perfect for someone with a fire quirk. It gives him a futuristic yet primordial appearance, making him appear like a living fire, an unstoppable force of light and heat. The suit's foundation is a jet black bodysuit that resembles reinforced Kevlar or carbon fiber in texture and heat resistance. It provides flexibility and protection by adhering to the body without appearing flimsy. Muscle groups and movement lines are highlighted by red and orange lines that run along the contours of the suit and glow like molten rock when heated internally. In addition to being fashionable, these imply integrated channels for directing heat or flame energy. At the chest is a bold, angular flame insignia that forms a sharp V and points downward. A helmet with a sleek visor that covers the head except for the mouth and chin. Even in the dark, the visor emits a blazing stare due to its glowing amber or molten gold. The helmet's sleek patterns blend in with the suit's luminous accents, creating a unified and aerodynamic design. Presumably heat-resistant, reinforced soles are designed for both combat and rapid movement on any surface. Acceleration and speed are highlighted by glowing streaks that extend down to the tips. Finally, precise fire projection is made possible by fingerless gloves with glowing seams. These gloves can be used to channel plasma, shoot fire blasts, or even improve melee attacks with punches coated in flames. Two pro heroes were already waiting when the gates of Ground Beta groaned open. Handpicked by the Commission, he was familiar with their files. One of them was essentially a walking safety valve for Izuku's worst-case situations, absorbing ambient heat and releasing it as thermal blasts. The other, a combat specialist there to assess his technique, was more traditional. On paper, they were sufficiently friendly. Izuku, however, was not naive. They were handlers with hero licenses, not mentors. Officers on warrant dressed as guardians. Perhaps that was fair. Perhaps he was a bomb that needed to be defused. The cooling fibers in his new costume hummed softly against his skin as he entered the training field. His eyes narrowed as he muttered, "All right," under his breath. "Let's get this over with. 1A tomorrow, the Commission's leash tonight." The past was here to stay, either way. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Mirio sat by himself in the quiet lounge of the dorm. He clenched his fists against his knees as his hands shook. The boy who called himself Lemillion felt completely worthless for the first time in his life. All Might's successor, what a joke, he said sourly, his voice going dry. I couldn't even save one little girl. He saw her face once more, her small fingers clinging to his sleeve as she pleaded with him not to send her back, bandages wrapped around weak limbs. Her voice continued to reverberate in his skull like a curse, please, take me away from him. What did he do? He relaxed. He permitted her to return to the man who had harmed her. Mirio struck the armrest of the couch with his fist. Damn it. The storm inside him was hardly subdued by the impact. He would have done so if he had been able to phase through the floor and sink into the ground until it crushed him. Anything to get away from the coward's image that he sees in every mirror. Chisaki. Bile rose in his throat at the mere thought of the name. Everyone referred to All for One, the adversary of All Might, as the height of evil. However, Kai Chisaki, he was a monster, not merely a villain. Quirk erasing bullets made from his own daughter, as raw material, repeatedly disassembling and reassembling her on a subatomic level, tearing her apart cell by cell in order to sell her suffering in tidy little metal shells. Mirio shook his voice and whispered, how does anyone survive that? He buried his face in his hands and asked, how does she keep breathing, keep hoping? And I left her there. The walls of the dorm felt too close, too confining, and he wanted to scream until his throat bled. Najire would try to cheer him up while Tamaki was still in the hospital, but Sir Night-Eye would quickly see right through him. False hope or consoling lies were not what Mirio wanted. He wanted to feel the weight of his failure, if only to allow the pain to consume him for a change. The irony nearly made him laugh. I'm supposed to save 1,000,000 people, he said. His laugh turned to a choked sob. Lemillion, the hero who saves everyone. I couldn't even save one. What kind of hero am I? He said. Maybe I'm not a hero at all. His thoughts turned to Mayfly, the ordinary hero who had rescued him when he was a child after he had fallen off a bridge. His entire life had been shaped by that moment. For others, he aspired to be that. Like All Might, he aspired to represent safety. Now, though, what had he become? Someone who, in order to facilitate an investigation, allowed a child to return to her abuser. No more justifications. No more acting like you're someone you're not. Shaking, he wiped his eyes. Even through the tears, his voice was steady and low. I don't care if I'm unworthy. I don't care if I have to crawl through hell itself. Eri, I'll save you. I'll make it right, or I'll die trying. The name Lemillion has to mean something. It has to. Mirio's vow felt more weighty than any villain's blow when he was alone in the dark dorm. It was raw, almost desperate, but neither heroic nor loud. However, it was genuine. The sound of heavy footsteps in the hallway caused Sir Night-Eye to look up from his desk. Mirai asked the tall, flame-wreathed number 2 hero, Endeavor. As he entered the office containing the pros he had chosen for the Shi-Hasaikai raid. I'm still surprised you volunteered yourself for the complete eradication of the last remnants of the Yakuza. You always seem to find ways to put too much on your plate. I go where I am needed, was Endeavor's blunt response. The ice villain I am hunting was first seen attacking criminals who acquired samples of these Quirk deleters. There is a high chance I can find him by targeting the source. Mirai adjusted his glasses and said, I appreciate your candor. There was nothing left to say between them. The pros and the Night-Eye agency continued their last-minute raid preparations. Everyone was aware that a fight was unavoidable, but a warrant to search the compound had already been obtained. The Shi-Hasaikai and other criminals had not made it this far by quietly giving up. If it weren't for their livelihood, they would fight to the death to keep their vicious boss, Kai Chisaki, safe. They might all collapse if that's the case. Additionally, there was the persistent concern about potential interference from the League of Villains. Since Stain's passing, the League had remained hidden, and there was no proof linking them to the Hasaikai. But if they did show up, safety measures were in place. The unidentified Iceman was the bigger worry. The only plan was to send Endeavor if he showed up, but there was no reliable way to gauge his level of threat. Some had suggested that All Might should just be asked to handle it as usual, but Mirai would only respond that All Might would arrive when he was really needed. Furthermore, Lemillion was technically already someone of that caliber present. After his quirk awakening, many people started speculating that Tagata might become the next one hero, but many people had their doubts because he had only shown himself in the third-year sports festival. Such doubts would have infuriated Mirai once. He now just awaited the opportunity to prove Mirio's value to the world, and where could that be more appropriate than the Yakuza's demise? Mirai understood Tagata's anguish at not being able to rescue the young girl from Shisaki's grasp. Mirai was actually more repulsed by himself. As the once proud sidekick of All Might, Sir Night-Eye had brought shame upon himself by telling Mirio that he had done the right thing by allowing Chisaki to reclaim her. Mirio would accept full responsibility if something went wrong and they were unable to save that girl, whether Chisaki hid her or she passed away. Tagata would not tolerate that embarrassment. Mirio's hand had been restrained by his influence. Unfortunately, nothing is ever that easy. The door exploded. A policeman who was supposed to participate in the raid staggered in, eyes wide and face white. He cried, terrible news. The Shi-Hasaikai compound has already been attacked. The whole structure's been frozen. The room fell silent for a moment. Frozen, stumbled one of the detectives. Another pro-hero, what do you mean frozen? Demanded. By who? Another, shaken, mumbled, is this some kind of joke? The officer gave a quick shake of his head. No joke. Witnesses say the entire building is encased in ice. Walls, ceilings, everything. It happened before we even deployed. Around the room, there were gasps and whispers. What about the targets? Exclaimed one of the heroes. The girl? What about the girl? We don't know, agreed the officer. We don't know anything about survivors or casualties. Just that it's completely frozen solid. Even the most experienced professionals exchanged shocked glances. An unexpected and terrifying turn had just been added to the already tense mission. Toshinori held the phone to his ear and whispered, "My God," in a tight voice. After listening to Mirai's report about the frozen Shi-Hasaikai compound in silence, he was now barely able to speak without trembling. He made himself straighten, breathe, and talk with the purposeful accuracy for which he had always been renowned. Understood. I'll head over there as soon as I can. His skeletal hand trembled only slightly as he lowered the phone and hung up slowly. Nezu cocked his little head next to him, his keen eyes never missing anything. The dean said, "It's unwise, Toshinori," politely but firmly. "And the embers inside you, Nabaro City is 500 miles from here. By the time you arrive, there won't be much you can do." His face briefly softened. They won't last much longer. Yagi's jaw tightened. Nezu was correct, and he knew it. His strength was almost gone, and his body was not what it had been. All his instincts, however, begged him to take action, to be present, to assist. He pushed down the restless need with a slow exhale. You're right. For now, we should focus on why we came here. A small group of doctors escorted the two of them as they stood in the sterile, white hallways of a mental health facility. Overhead, there was a faint buzzing of fluorescent lights. The air was heavy with the smell of antiseptic. Nezu had made a personal request, which the dean of UA had chosen to handle himself, which was why they had come here. 3 patients, 2 grown adults and a young man just past boyhood, were housed behind a glass partition. Each of the 3 was securely strapped into a wheelchair. One of them was drooling, and their mouths were hanging open. They had lifeless, glassy, unfocused eyes, like dolls with their strings severed. It wasn't the vacant expression of psychosis or trauma. It was something much worse. Vegetative state, muttered one of the physicians. No responsiveness, no voluntary motion. The reason for which Yagi and Nezu were familiar. The doctors said in low voices, it wasn't stress-induced or a typical mental break. Direct electrical overload, delivered through the cranium. The voltage had been concentrated at the brain stem and cerebral cortex. There were signs of deliberate tampering, foreign neurological patterning, synaptic burn marks between the anterior cingulate cortex and the basal ganglia. Making decisions. Emotional control. Execution of an action. Whoever had done this wasn't trying to kill. They were trying to rewrite the victims and failed, or succeeded in a way more horrifying than death. Yagi recalled the previous accounts of animals that had been killed and subjected to similar experiments. Now the alleged animal abuser had gotten worse. He was using people in his experiments, and he left them like empty shells rather than blowing up their heads. Throughout his career, Yagi had witnessed many horrific events that, even after all these years, still woke him up at night. It was close to the worst, but not quite, and he was most uneasy about the unknown. Still, why were these 3 targeted? Was this random cruelty, wrong place, wrong time, or were these victims selected on purpose? The enigmatic hero inquired. A detective entered the room and took a folder. His words were grim. We've identified them, he said. Gathered what we could on their backgrounds. He began by pointing to the oldest victim. Takaku Amanzo, businessman, accused of embezzlement by a partner in his company. He proved his innocence, but questions lingered. His daughter's sudden purchase of a car far above their means raised eyebrows. And the partner who accused him went missing a month later. The investigator turned to the second individual, Shimabukuro Ogai. He cheated on his late wife with her own sister last year. The betrayal wasn't public, but enough people knew, and she committed suicide not long after. And lastly, the youngest, Okuda Botan, first-year student at Kogan University, studying to join the Hero Public Safety Commission. Clean public record. Teachers call him a model student. But there are rumors, claims from his old schoolmates that he was a cruel bully in high school. The ward hung heavy with silence. The lights seemed to be humming louder than before. Nezu's cool-headed, incisive analysis broke it. When Nezu said, so, he, or she, is targeting humans with skeletons in their closets. People who are far less noble behind closed doors, his whiskers quirked. Perhaps, it's their way of minimizing the backlash if the truth of their victim's character comes to light. The public is less sympathetic when the fallen aren't saints. His small paws were folded behind his back. Whoever this bastard is, they'll be a challenging one. Yagi's gaze lingered on the vacant, drooling faces. His stomach turned. He secretly wished that this villain had simply murdered them. This was worse. With his breath hazy in the cold air, Mirio gulped. You know, sir, I never was a praying man, but after this, I think I might have to start. Behind his glasses, Sir Night-Eye's eyes narrowed. He whispered a rare curse. I think I'll join you. And let's pray to any god listening that this situation can still be salvaged, because if not. They were at a loss for words when they arrived at the Shihasaikai compound. The enormous building was covered in ice. Floor after floor was punctured by jagged spires that rose from the earth like titanic spears. The air itself, completely cold, bit into their lungs. The silence was deafening, and every surface was covered in frost. Whispering, oh, my God, Najire encircled herself with her arms. It's like the whole world just stopped. The Yakuza members scattered throughout the area were even more horrifying. Some were frozen in mid-motion, their eyes wide with unending fear, inside crystal-clear ice. Others were sprawled on the ground, their bodies already displaying severe frostbite, their lips blue, their skin pale. Some remained motionless. One of the officers cracked his voice and stammered, are they dead? Some are alive, snarled Endeavor as he moved forward. Some aren't. Endeavor did not hesitate, his flames roaring outward in a great wave of heat. Not to burn, but to drive back the deadly cold, the fire licked across the frozen battlefield. As the temperature started to rise, steam rose in dense clouds. Remain vigilant, Endeavor yelled. All clear a path. Rescue teams. Start warming the survivors. Move. The horror only increased as they pushed farther inside. More corpses, frozen. At least 12 people have been confirmed dead. Shisaki's right hand, chronostasis, was one of them. The cold, frost that formed hideous patterns on his dead skin was the thing that mangled his body the most. Whispering, he didn't stand a chance, a pro said. Mirio's eyes darted all over, and his heart thumped. A frantic, Eri, please be okay, he muttered. With her own eyes searching every shadow, Najire hovered just behind him. Then footsteps. Everybody froze. It was slow and methodical. A rhythm that sliced like a blade through the unsettling silence. The temperature appeared to drop further. A figure stepped out of the freezing fog. The Iceman. He was a fairly tall man with jet black hair that was naturally tousled and spiked, giving him an easygoing appearance. His bangs fall just above his eyes, framing his sharp face, and it's not too long. The rough, combat-ready look is enhanced by a few loose strands. His narrow, cobalt blue eyes have a cool intensity. Even though Fatgum is completely covered, his slender body is muscular. He isn't big but obviously athletic, with the build of someone who values dexterity and accuracy over strength. Without trying, his face conveys a sense of calmness, seriousness, and intimidation. He's dressed in a long, black trench coat that reaches past his knees, featuring a dramatic flare at the hem and a high collar. The coat has a futuristic or magical vibe thanks to the glowing cobalt blue piping around the edges and seams. Small metallic clasps and stylized patterns, resembling runic shapes or arcane sigils, adorn the lapels. His sword arm appears to be better protected because of the additional blue-plated guard piece on the right side and the slightly armored padding on the shoulders. The right arm has a segmented blue metal gauntlet that resembles a bracer and is strapped tightly for protection and possibly energy channeling, while the left arm is covered by the coat's sleeve. He's wearing a casual, untucked light gray V-neck shirt underneath. His contemporary, urban style is enhanced by this contrast with the elaborate coat. He wears slim, dark pants that are both fashionable and combat-ready without limiting movement. Black boots with strengthened soles and toes that might have concealed straps or pockets. His coat's glow is reflected in the boots' delicate blue detailing, which unifies the ensemble. With blue accents that match his bracers, these fingerless gloves provide dexterity and grip. He has a teardrop pendant on a thin chain around his neck. It's metallic and has a faintly glinting gem or crystal inset, probably related to his past or abilities. Even seasoned professionals' hearts trembled at the stifling aura of his murderous aura. He moved with an eerie composure, and there was a tiny figure in his right arm. Mirio exclaimed, Eri, with a wave of relief that was soon followed by fear. Her small face was buried against his chest, and she was unresponsive and limp in his grasp. Uncomfortably still, as if the cold had not touched her, she was not shivering. The man fixed Mirio with his emotionless eyes. He spoke with a voice akin to a blade dragging across stone. He said bluntly, well, look who it is, little one, to the girl he was holding. The false hero who left you behind. The group erupted in gasps. Mirio recoiled like she had been stabbed. With her hands clenched into fists, Najire cried out, what? What the hell is that supposed to mean? Unblinking, the Iceman cocked his head slightly. His words were filled with silent venom. Tell me, are you here to save face? Or finish the job when nobody is watching? Finish, what job? A shaky policeman cried. Mirio opened her mouth, but nothing came out. In his ears, his heart thumped. He sensed that everyone was watching him in disbelief, waiting for an explanation. He felt his stomach turn. Mirio finally managed to say, give her back, his voice trembling but getting louder. Give Eri back, now. The Iceman's eyes remained fixed. He didn't loosen or tighten his hold on the child. He simply stood there, a ghost in the snow that could not be read. Careful, Lemillion, said Sir Night-Eye humbly, his normally composed demeanor faltering a bit. At his sides, his fingers shook. "We don't know what he wants yet." The Iceman's voice, barely audible above the icy air, asked, "What do I want?" With surgical precision, his eyes shifted to Mirio and he said, "I want justice. I want monsters to answer for what they've done. I used to think that anyone tied to All Might wanted the same thing, but there goes another bridge burned by deception and false messiahs." Mirio gasped for air. I. With sparks flying all around her, Najire took a step forward. "You don't know anything about him. About us." She didn't even get a glance from the Iceman. As though the others didn't exist, he simply gazed at Mirio. It was oppressively tense. The fine line between words and violence was palpable to all the heroes in attendance. And Eri, in his arm, so quiet, so little. "I know enough," said the Iceman. "And when I'm done, there won't be any heroes left."
I will continue the story in next part. Till then, bye bye.